What if Naruto was taken by the Dark One by Erozalin? Link to the fanfiction will be in the description.
New deal. Shiki Fuin, Minato yelled as he finished the last hand seal, the massive Kyuubi freezing at the words as it began to look around in minor fear. As vicious and powerful as it may be, the demon chakra fox still had a soul that could be sealed away for eternity. However, both witnesses saw that the Shinigami didn't appear. For the demon fox, this was the best news he'd ever had, but for Minato, he felt his heart drop. This was supposed to be it, his secret weapon against the Kyuubi. I don't understand. I did all the research before writing this seal down. It should have worked. Why didn't it work? Minato wondered aloud, and due to his inner turmoil, he didn't see the giant tail swinging right at him until it was too late to dodge. The blonde was thrown across the clearing into a stone that sent his head spiraling, and his vision flickering like a defective light bulb. Ha ha ha, it figures that you meatsacks couldn't even die properly. As if the mighty god of death himself would come that simply, just because you made some flashy seals. Well, I'll tell you what, Minato Namikaze, I'll give you a one-way ticket straight to the big man himself so you can ask him what happened here tonight. Kyuubi roared, charging up a large black ball of energy in his maw. If the Shiki Fuin didn't work, then what can I do to stop him? I can't think of another seal strong enough to hold him at full power. The 8-point seal could hold the Kyuubi back at half power, but then Naruto could never learn to use the Kyuubi's power. Besides, I needed the Shiki Fuin to seal the other half into myself so the Shinigami could take us both. Minato said, pushing himself to his feet as he pulled out a tri-pronged kunai, a wooden handle with some kanji carved and gripped tightly in his hand. All the same, it doesn't matter now. All I can do is hold him off long enough for the village to evacuate. He made a quick set of hand seals as a small toad with black and yellow markings appeared beside him. Gamurai, run to the Jiraiya-sensei. Tell him the seal didn't work, and he needs to evacuate the village as quickly as possible. Minato ordered, and despite the commanding tone, the toad didn't move at all as he looked at his partner with confusion evident in his tiny eyes. But Minato, what are you going to do? Gamurai asked, already fearing the answer he knew was coming. I'm going to save my son, Minato said, his tone leaving no room for argument as Gamurai nodded slightly, turning away as he disappeared in a flash of yellow, mirroring Minato's exact movement simultaneously as the fourth Hokage appeared beside Naruto, vulnerable, in his crib. Grabbing the tiny blonde boy, Minato teleported away as quickly as possible, trying desperately to outstrip the Kyuubi who was charging up an attack behind him. It would seem Kyuubi's anger towards Minato and his family outweighed his rage for Konoha. Minato was forced to continually teleport out of the way of tail swings, paw swipes, and interspersed bijudamas as he fled with his newborn son in tow. He must have covered several miles before finally coming to a stop. If only there was something, anything I could try. I'd give anything to stop this monster. Minato despaired frantically as he spotted his home village in the distance. At the center, the Hokage Tower, and his office stood above the rest of the village. It doesn't matter what tricks you have up your sleeves, Minato, or where you try to hide. I will find you, and kill you. Kyuubi roared, tensing up his legs as he started to run towards the village, only for large chains to wrap around him, restraining him from going any further. What trick is this, Minato? I thought I just told you it was useless to try and hold me. Kyuubi yelled, only to hear a pitiful, racking cough, laugh just ahead. His eyes drifted downwards to spot the source of both the sound and the chains, one mortally wounded Kushina Uzumaki. I guess it's a good thing that I'm so stubborn then, isn't it? Kushina gasped out, crouching on top of a tree which blew in the intense winds as Kyuubi roared, trying with all his power to get to the redhead and kill her. I don't know what plan Minato has, but I'll give him all the time he needs because I'll die to protect my family. Kushina hissed out, her breath starting to come faster and faster, and getting more ragged all the while. Stupid human, you might have been spared had you ran and hid like the rest of your kind. But no, you had to die to save your family. Bah, Kyuubi said, gripping the ground tightly as his muscles pushed outwards, the chains buckling against his strength as Kushina sighed, her chakra totally drained as she was left defenseless against the Kyuubi. I don't really do demons, but I can't refuse a good deal. Of course, magic does come at a price. A giddy voice echoed from the woods around Minato, who held Naruto closer to his chest. Who's there? Come out, Minato ordered, looking in every direction for the owner of the voice. Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to kill you if that's what you're worried about. You did offer anything to stop the furball, right? The voice said, Minato whirling around to find a man leaning against a tree clad in leather with a manic grin on his face. In fact, his skin looked almost scaly. Who are you? What do you want? Minato said, pulling out a kunai to defend Naruto and himself with. I said don't worry about it, but if you must know, I am the answer to your problems. I stopped the demon, you pay the price, the man said, and Minato lowered his weapon, looking the man over. If you can really stop it, I'll give you my life as payment. My head is worth several million, Minato offered, and the giddy way the man giggled sent a shiver down his spine. Oh, I can stop it, but I'm not after money, no, what I want is something far more treasured than your life. Say, that boy in your arms perhaps. Hearing him up close, the man reminded Minato of Orochimaru. No, I refuse to let you touch a hair on his head, Minato said, jumping back. Naruto still held tightly to his chest. Had Minato's mind been elsewhere, he would have noticed that the Kyuubi's roars had stopped. But, isn't that what you had planned anyway? For you to die, leaving your son to be treated like a pariah for his life. Trust me, being a pariah isn't that fun. Simply sign on the dotted line and all your troubles will be gone. The man said, producing a yellowed scroll from nowhere, which he rolled down his back for Minato to sign. Contract. Not even reading the rest of the scroll, Minato heard the roar of the Kyuubi directly overhead. Not having any time to question it, he pulled an inked brush across the dotted line, the flowing script of his name glowing red for a second before the contract rolled back up, the man placing it into his jacket. The deal is struck, he called out, and with a snap of his fingers, Naruto appeared in his arms. And so the little tyke doesn't get lonesome. A small stuffed fox joined Naruto, 9 fluffy tails behind it, frozen in time. Then, the man turned around, vanishing in a swirl of black smoke which disappeared with him. Minato looked around in vain to locate his taken son. Surely, the man didn't expect a ninja to keep his word. But try as he might, he couldn't find hide or hair of Naruto or the mysterious stranger with whom he'd made a deal. A deal with the devil, he amended. Meanwhile, in a castle far, far away, a man appeared in a swirl of smoke, carrying a small blonde child who was sleeping peacefully. Clutched tightly in the child's arms was a stuffed Kyuubi, the cold black eyes free of the malice the demon had in life. I can't believe it. What is it with people that they'll sign away their children to fix their problems? I would never do that to Bae, the man said, staring at the tiny child in his arms. What had he been thinking when he asked for the baby? It wasn't like he could care for a newborn all alone. He could barely care for his one son Balefire. Speaking of the Dark One's son, he walked into the room right then, covered in dirt. Hey Dad, I was kinda playing with Kai in woods, and tripped and fell in a mud puddle. Think you could help me out? Balefire asked, his father simply waving his hand as the filth vanished. Thanks Dad, love you, Bae said, running back outside. Dad, I suppose it couldn't hurt anything to watch the little guy. If it comes down to it, I'll just leave him at the orphanage in town. Now then, what to call you? He thought aloud, looking at the blonde child who twisted in his grip, the sunlight washing over his sun-kissed hair. Gold, I like it. You are now Gold Uzumaki, he said confidently, only for the child to begin crying. Naruto Gold. Coo, baby Naruto burbled out, squeezing his toy tightly. Much better. Name the price. Naruto groaned as he topped yet another hill, his father already climbing the next one with no problems, although he also was aided by a more mature body and magic. It filled Naruto with a growing longing for those things. However, I still had years to go until he was ready to learn magic, although his father had promised to teach him once he was older. Older apparently had a different meaning to the magic-wielding man than to his son, considering Naruto always argued that he was older than last time he asked. On some level, Naruto felt that he should feel betrayed, tricked by his father's promise, but he didn't care. When B had tried to drag him through that creepy portal, Naruto hadn't wanted to go. Sure, he loved his brother, but he loved his father too, and his father had promised him the world if he stayed with him. All he asked for was magic. It seemed like a better deal than jumping through a portal into some unknown land, teeming with adventure. Naruto was not the adventurous type, but he was very certain of his path in life. He could recall with perfect clarity all the times his father had demonstrated his magic, and the all-encompassing joy that took over Naruto as he copied his father's hand flourishes, although nothing ever came of them. And so the pair, Rumpelstiltskin and Naruto Gold, had left their home, the tiny hut holding too many painful memories, with not a gold piece to their name. They had brought only the essentials, along with a few personal treasures, such as Balefire's traveling shawl, Rumpel's old cane and dagger, and Naruto's stuffed fox toy, which had become akin to a security blanket over the years. Shaking his head free of the cloying memories, he rushed after his father, his tiny pack bouncing safely against his back. Looking up, his father had paused at the peak of the next hill, looking back at him as he raced down the hill and up the other side, having to jump over several potholes and protruding boulders that no doubt limited carriage travel down this road. "Keep up, son. I don't want to lose you," Rumpel said in this gleeful voice, as if losing Naruto was his exact reason for going ahead. Naruto didn't think that though. He knew his father loved him dearly. "Sorry, father, but if you'd teach me magic, you wouldn't have to worry about losing me," Naruto said childishly, and his father chuckled at his ability to turn any situation into a bargain. He had taught him well. "We'll discuss it when we reach our destination. It's not much further, son," the Dark One spoke, Naruto sighing as they topped yet another hill, the repetitive nature of their journey eating away at his childish patience. They had gone on a grand adventure to find their place to live, so where was all the exotic scenery and traveling caravans? It filled the small blonde with a sense of depression, which his father picked up on, looking at his traveling companion with confusion. "Something the matter, Ruto?" the questioned boy sighed, throwing his arms outwards, gesturing to the world. "It's so boring, just one hill after another, with nothing to look at other than trees. There aren't even any animals to entertain me," he complained, and Rumpel looked at him as he tried to think of a solution. Failing to find an alternative, he turned back to his tried and true answer: magic. With a single hand flourish, the green tress were painted in the vibrancy of autumn, the glistering golds, the sunset oranges, the vermilion reds, and rusty browns. A second flourish sent a myriad of the leaves swirling around, fluttering down to ghost over their skin. Looking at his son expecting glee, Rumpel was taken aback by his son's downtrodden look. "Is there no place that is beautiful without magic? Is there no natural brilliancy, like the masterful brushstrokes of a benevolent artist?" Any attempt to emphasize the unseen beauty only served to reveal just how truly flawed it is. If I am unable to notice such subtle splendor, then how can I hope to appreciate the natural beauty in all living things? Naruto said, holding out his hand as a single leaf alighted upon it, Naruto looking at the radiance as the sun caught its contours perfectly, painting Naruto's body blood red. Then, with a simple sweeping motion, he swept the leaves aside and trod onwards towards his new home. Rumpel looked after his son, wondering what had happened to the childish blonde he knew, who complained when it rained, or bawled so loudly when he was hungry, at least at a younger age, although he had no issues informing Rumpel when he would be fed. When had he turned into such an aesthete? It was several hours later when Rumpel stopped in a large clearing looking around before smiling in his manic way, deeming the place worthy of his goal. "We've made it, son. This will be our new home," he said, turning back to Naruto, who was leaning against a tree, his pack set aside as he rested in the shade. Hearing his father's proclamation, he sighed with a tone of finality. Seeing that Naruto approved of his choice, Rumpel began the task of assembling their new home, which began to take shape into a magnificent castle. Once the framework was done, he entered the vast, empty building, looking around as if deciding which rooms would go where. "I call the Northwest Tower," Naruto declared as he carried his meager belongings over to the aforementioned corner, sitting down as the tower took shape around him, lifting him up as boards rose, hoisted up by stones stacking atop one another. It took nearly half the day for Rumpelstiltskin to put the finishing touches on his castle, Naruto caring little for the other rooms of the castle after his tower was done, although he was pleased to know that a grand library had been raised near him, although his father's dungeons were located athwart to his room. He even had a small kitchenette connected to his room, which would probably get more use than the main dining hall. Deciding to test out the bed, he quickly fell into a dreamless sleep. Devil's Advocate. There are more books in here than I could read in a lifetime. Well, I certainly hope you can dust faster than you can read, dearie. It had been a week since that day, and Belle was still working her way around the library, dusting off tomes. Truth be told, she probably could have gotten the job done faster if she didn't stop every 10 to 15 minutes to pull a book from its place, reading the cover, and occasionally the first few pages. Hearing the telling tinkling of the bell, Belle replaced her current distraction, climbing down the rolling ladder as she straightened her dress, before hurrying to the central dining room, passing a closed door on her way. She'd noticed it the first day she'd been allowed into the library, and started to open it, only to be told off, with specific instructions to never go into that room. The curiosity was starting to eat away at her. What could the room contain? Rare books, enough gold to provide for the kingdom for years, possibly even some dangerous creature. Shaking her head, she chided herself. Those books are starting to get to me, seeing grandiose mysteries in the smallest things. Her shoes could be heard down the empty hallway as she turned, entering the nearly vacant dining room. "You rang?" she said, seeing his gleeful look that usually promised misery for someone. On the long table in front of him was a single piece of paper. From her angle, she couldn't read it, but judging from the quality of the paper, it looked expensive. "Yes, we're going to be having a guest for dinner tonight, and I expect you to be on your best behavior. He's an important person, and I'm not going to lose the best servant I've had simply because she can't prepare a decent meal," her overly happy master ordered, and she bowed slightly, turning for the kitchen. "One other thing, he likes boysenberry pie." He swept his hand out, sending her away as he turned back to whatever he did when not under scrutiny. Belle held her tongue. Boysenberries were out of season in the nearby villages. If she was being forced to prepare a pie with them, she'd have to travel quite a distance to get some, not mention drop a decent amount of gold for them. And would she ever receive any thanks or reparations for her troubles? Doubtful. More than likely, she'd end up being forced to watch the Dark One blackmail yet another person into one of his lopsided deals. That or put poison in the pie. She could never tell when involving her employer. Sighing, she strode to the door, grabbing her traveling cloak from a peg as she left to buy the needed ingredients. Luckily for Belle, a traveling merchant was in town, and had some boysenberries, although she was strong-armed into giving him enough gold to build a market stand. But it meant she'd have some free time to read one of her books with the spare time. That was if she wasn't asked to perform more inane cleaning for the Dark One. Once back in the strange comfort of the castle, she set to work in the kitchens, preparing dinner for her employer and his guest, who she didn't even know anything about save the fact that it was a male. For a few moments, she entertained the notion that he may be a visiting prince, or some royalty that would see the injustice and stand up to Rumpelstiltskin, engaging a fanciful duel with said beast, vanquishing him atop the parapets of the castle, ending the Dark One's reign of evil terror. She was brought out of her daydreams by the sound of the stew being brought to a rolling boil over the sweet-smelling fire. Glancing out a window, she heard the telltale sound of that incessant bell. Surely it wasn't already time for dinner. She'd only been back an hour at most, and barely had anything made. Yet as she turned back, food was covering every possible surface without intermingling among each other. Weird, Belle thought, before the bell's ringing caused her to jump slightly, hurrying to the dining table, carrying food. As she reached the open door, she stopped, catching her breath as she entered slowly, taking in the second occupant of the table. He had wild blonde hair that looked like sunshine given form. He still had on his traveling cloak, which was midnight blue with crimson trim. She couldn't see his legs under the long table as she set the first course down, turning back to get the next course. As she returned, the two were conversing, the blonde's elbows resting on the table, his fingers intertwined. On his right hand, he had 2 rings, one with a dark jewel embedded. He chuckled, a deep intonation, and she blushed, accidentally running into the table, sending a sharp pain down her leg. The plate she was holding probably would have fallen if it hadn't vanished in a swirl of smoke, appearing on the table by Rumpelstiltskin. He had the only other face he ever had, annoyance, which was glaring at her in full force. "Good help is so hard to find nowadays," he claimed, sighing as Belle fought down her rising indignation. But just as she opened her mouth to apologize, she felt a worn hand touch her side imploringly as she winced. "Oh, don't be so harsh. The table takes up like half the room, and we both know I ran into it several times when I was younger," the blonde said from in front of her, his face in a cool smile, his electric blue eyes twinkling as he looked back to Rumple. Looking back at her, he pulled a chair out, gesturing for her to sit down. "Why don't you join us, dear? Help or not, you look hungry, and every meal is better in the presence of the fairer sex." She blushed a deeper shade of red, before glancing at her employer. This man was a guest and he was acting as if this was his castle. Chances were the Dark One wouldn't stand for this. Her judgment won out as she shook her head, turning back to the kitchen, rubbing her hip where a bruise would be later. "No, sir, I have to finish serving the meal. It's not proper to shirk my duties," she explained, only to be pulled back as she was forced into the chair this time, the blonde smiling genially. "Well, if that's the problem, then I can solve that." With a sweeping motion of his hand, the table was covered by the numerous plates of food that had graced the kitchen moments earlier. "Now then, will you join us?" She noticed for the first time that he had 6 marks, 3 to a cheek, which resembled whiskers. They seemed too cute for a grown man. "They're birthmarks," he said, reading her expression as she blushed, before joining the two at the end of the table. "Now then, where were we? Oh yes? You were trying to convince me to stay overnight here before heading out tomorrow," the blonde said, pulling his cloak out from under him before retaking his seat, a snap of his fingers filling his plate with food as he began eating in a dignified manner, despite his roguish appearance. If I could be permitted, who are you?" Belle asked, before realizing that both men were looking at her in confusion. "You didn't tell her about me. I'm hurt," the blonde said, pouting at Rumple, who looked like he had a headache coming on. "It's not her business, Naruto. She had her orders, and that's all that mattered," the man said, glaring at Belle through his eyelashes. "Ah, well, we can't have uninformed help around here. I am Naruto, son of Rumpelstiltskin, and considering the fact that you aren't dead yet, either my father has grown soft in his previous years, or he's taken a fancy with you. Grand adventure." "Ah, well, we can't have uninformed help around here. I am Naruto, son of Rumpelstiltskin, and considering the fact that you aren't dead yet, either my father has grown soft in his previous years, or he's taken a fancy with you." Belle could hear the words echoing in her mind as she quickly glanced over to see him smiling as he took a sip of his goblet. Just the same, his father was choking on his drink at the words, an angry glare digging into Naruto's head as he ignored the glare, unaffected. There weren't many people who could just shrug off the Dark One's peeved glare, but Naruto topped that list, having grown up with the man, knowing that no real malice was behind the glare. Belle, however, awaited her master to turn the blonde into a piece of cutlery or a bug, as he so frequently did, but it never came as he sighed, turning back to his food. "Now, as I was saying, I'm leaving in the morning, preferably before the sun gets too high," Naruto said, slicing a piece of meat in a perfectly sectioned piece, placing it in his mouth as he sighed in contentment. "Delicious. I'd forgotten how utterly delightful something that isn't jerky tastes." "Well, maybe if you came by more often, you wouldn't have that problem. All the same, must you leave so early? Maybe wait a day or two. We could go and terrorize the local villages," Rumpelstiltskin said, ignoring the food on his plate as Naruto not so stealthily reached over and scraped his food onto his plate as he sat back down, devouring the food happily. Rumple sighed. "I wish I could too, father, but we both know I'm more at ease in the wilds than in a castle," Naruto explained as Belle demurely sipped the broth of the stew from her seat, quietly watching the interaction between the two. "And we both know that's a lie, all things considered. But I suppose if you're so dead set on leaving so soon, I won't stop you, just try to stop in more often." "I miss you sometimes, Ruto," the Dark One exclaimed, the last part under his breath due to present company. Thank you. Now I believe someone mentioned boysenberry pie? The room seemed brighter with Naruto's smile. The next day, Naruto set out at dawn, just as planned, leaving a note behind for his father, although Naruto doubted he was asleep, probably brooding in his stately room overlooking the entrance. Strapped to a clasp on his pants was a sleek scabbard, his sword inside, the blade the color of a raven's wing with the hilt embossed with the insignia of the Queen's Guard. Hanging from the other side was a coin purse which jangled with every few steps, the gold inside setting the tone for his journey. Barely an hour later, he stopped, turning back as he crossed his arms, his face the picture of royalty as he awaited the response. You going to follow me the whole way, or were you planning on announcing yourself? He called out, a bush rustling as Belle looked out from behind a tree sheepishly. Sorry, but I've always wanted to go on an adventure, and this just seemed like the best time. She apologized, bowing at the waist, curtsying to him as he seemed conflicted, which he was. I should send you back to my father right now. He'll probably be furious that you've done this, but maybe since you came right back, he won't kill you. Naruto said, turning away from her as he heard her stand up, running up as she got in front of him. No, please, let me come with you. I can help you, she said emphatically, nodding her head as if to assure him of her usefulness. Somehow I doubt you would be of much use to me. I highly doubt you can use a weapon, and you don't appear to have brought any food or supplies with you, Naruto said, his tone biting into Belle's hopes. Well, I'm very well read, and I'm sure you can use any information on where we're going, Belle said, as if trying to raise her own hopes rather than prove she wasn't useless. On that matter, I have little doubts, other than if you knew where we were going, you would know that no texts that you can find without risk to life and limb are very accurate. Besides, my room adjoins my father's library, and I've read every tomes within those walls at least thrice. Naruto spoke, before looking at Belle with a mischievous light in his eyes. So, unless there is some other service you have to offer, we're heading back to my father, he said, shocking Belle. The young woman was struck speechless by the crass nature of his question. Before she thought, she slapped him, wincing as her hand exploded in red-hot pain, the brunette nursing it as she snarled at Naruto. I would never degrade myself like that for some filthy pig. However, her words didn't seem to bother Naruto, but rather had the opposite effect as he smiled. I can see why my father is so fetched with you, precious. Perhaps I shall bring you along, free of charge, but only if you promise to do as I say, or I'll send you straight back. Deal? Naruto said, fully aware of what he was asking her as he stuck out his hand. Belle paused as she looked at it almost fearfully, aware of who he was and how his father operated. Fine, deal, but you better mind your tongue. I'm not some cheap whore, she said indignantly as she strode past him, the blonde smiling genially as he looked at his second ring, memories surfacing unbidden as he followed after Belle. Rumpelstiltskin, I summon thee, a woman called out, looking around for the person to appear. Not seeing anyone, she sighed, only to jump as she heard someone behind her. That's not how you say it, dearie, but then again, you didn't need to say anything to get my attention, the man said, leaning on one hand as he smiled at her in a manic way that slightly unnerved the woman. She took an unconscious step back only to trip over a chair as she started to fall back. However, the impact of the wooden floor never came as she felt someone catch her. Dad, what have I told you about just appearing behind people? You're going to give someone a heart attack one of these days, a voice said, and as woman opened her eyes, she saw it was the man who had caught her. Yes, but that's the point, son. I have a reputation to uphold, the scaly one said, almost whiningly. What are you? The woman said almost fearfully. From what she'd heard, the Dark One was a singular entity, yet two men had appeared when she's called. Somewhere inside of herself, she was hoping the blonde one was the Dark One. What, the scaly one said, his tone getting steadily higher as he looked indignantly at her. What a rude question, I am not a what? He seemed to almost pout as the blonde one snickered. I don't think she thought you were a what, Dad, more like a witch. More snickers as the woman smiled, holding in her laughter for fear of upsetting the Dark One who was mock glaring at her blonde savior, who helped her back to her feet finally. Sorry, I don't really know what I'm doing, especially seeing as I summoned two of you rather than the one I wanted. The woman apologized, bowing slightly in deference. That's okay, precious. I rarely know what I'm doing and I seem to be fine. The blonde one said, his electric blue eyes glimmering with some hidden mirth. Yes, well we both know that not true, Naruto. The scaly one said, sighing as he continued. I suppose I should introduce myself. Rumpelstiltskin, at your service. Rumpelstiltskin said with a hand flourish. And I am, the blonde one, Naruto, was cut off by a wave of Rumpelstiltskin's hand. Annoying, Rumpelstiltskin finished as Naruto glared at him. And you are Regina, Rumpel gestured to the woman, who nodded hesitantly. You know me? Regina asked, watching him as he smiled. But of course. Because of my mother, Korra. You taught her? Regina asked, Rumpel smiling in his knowing way as Naruto responded this time, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Great, you've stroked his ego. I was worried it wasn't big enough already, Naruto said, Rumpel frowning at him before snapping his fingers as Naruto vanished in a plume of smoke, replaced with a small fox, which immediately bounded around, yipping loudly. People say I look like my mother when she was younger, Regina said, looking to the side as Naruto leapt onto her shoulder, his fluffy tail wrapping around her neck, his whiskers tickling her cheek as he looked smugly at Rumpel. Really? I don't see it, but no, that's not how I know you, Rumpel said, reaching over to grab Naruto from her shoulder as the fox skirted his grasp, making a noise that sounded like laughter. Oh, then how? Regina said, watching the pair with caution, just in case she needed to get out of the way as Rumpel continued trying to catch the fox that seemed to be as slippery as a fish. I knew you a long time ago, dearie. It's been some time, but I knew this day would come. I've been waiting on it, and I'm so happy we're back where we belong, he said as he swung at the fox, who leapt over swing, running down his arm as he hit him in the face with his tail. Rumpel sputtered, trying to remove the fur from his mouth. Where's that? Regina asked hesitantly as the other occupants of the room froze, looking at her with identical grins. Together, they seemed to say. Let's play a game. Naruto walked along behind Belle, watching her carefully as she looked in awe at the surroundings. He couldn't blame her, especially since their destination was considered one of the forest's premier honeymoon locations. The problem arose in the country itself. Hey Belle, I think you may need to know something before I let you keep going. It occurred to me that you may not know where we're headed, and the country's ruling body's views. Naruto said with a straight face, stopping Belle as she looked at him in confusion. What do you mean, we're leaving the enchanted forest? She asked, equal parts excited and scared. It wasn't every day that one got to leave the country on an adventure, and save her sole trip to Arendelle. Belle wasn't familiar with any of the neighboring countries. Yes, but if you insist on going, you have to follow the laws, or you could face serious punishment, understand? Naruto said, getting in front of her this time as he reached into his bag, which he summoned in a small swirl of orange smoke. After several moments of rummaging around, he pulled out his desired object as she tossed it to her, and she looked between it and him, glaring heavily at him as she held a dog collar in her hands. You better not be telling me what I think you are, she growled, and Naruto shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. Where we're going, you will need to wear that collar at all times, he replied, continuing on as she raced after his longer stride. Finally, she caught up with him as she hurled the collar at him, only for it to vanish in a plume of smoke and reappear in her hands. I'm a knowledgeable woman, not a, she started, only to be stopped at Naruto's skeptical look. He paused to look at her as she looked infuriatedly off to the side, unable to meet his stern gaze that had come from his years of service. Not what? A slave. Because I can say, that's what my father thinks of you as, a dog, a slave, a piece of property to be bought, sold, and traded whenever your possessor pleases. And regardless of your personal views, you will wear this collar unless you want to go back to the castle, he said irritably. He was in a rush to get to the coast, or they'd miss their ship. I said I wasn't going to degrade myself, and I'm sticking to my words. Belle shouted as Naruto sighed, snapping his fingers as a slice of pie appeared on a small platter, accompanied by a fork as he cut into it, consuming the pie with a silent relief. Now that I'm calm, I'll explain the laws of this country I'm headed for. Women of any social class are viewed as property, slaves to the men's desires. As such, they are forced to wear collars such as the one I've given you. If a female is caught without a collar, she is considered a free piece to take. To summarize, if you don't wear that collar, any person on the street could walk up and claim you as his property, and the chances of the nobility grabbing a girl off the street are about as good as my father releasing you from your deal. Naruto said in a deadpan voice. That's barbaric. I'm sure some stupid chauvinistic male pig came up with that law. Belle cried out, throwing her hands up in disbelief. We're not arguing that point, because we share the same views. The differing views lie in our tolerance for such laws. As it doesn't affect me directly, I find it much easier to ignore, but that is why I felt the need to inform you. Would you rather I have waited until we landed, when you had no choice? Although, there is another option, but it is much worse in comparison. He cautioned, watching her as she considered it. What is this other option? I can't imagine much worse than being treated like a thing. Belle decided, Naruto sighing as he took the collar back, banishing it in a puff of smoke. I can turn you into a man, magically, but... Naruto trailed off, glancing to the side as a shrub rustled, revealing a frightened squirrel. And this would be a worse problem how? Belle asked, sounding almost scared at his possible response. If there was one thing she'd learned so far, it was that Naruto typically didn't share what could go wrong unless questioned. Because if women are viewed as property, then men are viewed as masters in society. In order for you to pass as a male, you would have to act the part, mistreating women should the occasion arise. I have years of experience in avoiding such situations, and when I am forced into it, I can be very persuasive. Naruto said with an almost fiendish grin. Can you give me a for instance? Belle asked, suddenly worried about her options. None of them set very well with her. If she went back to the castle, a beating or some other form of punishment was certain. If she went with Naruto, she'd either have to act the part of a slave, or an abusive pig. You never refer to females by name, usually by number or a crude nickname. If a man offers his toy to you for a night, you don't outright refuse. You simply thank him and crudely decline, traditionally with an excuse of having a higher quality toy. Also, the second most important rule to remember, never say that you have to piss or anything of the like. They'll leave the reason to your imagination. Naruto said with a disgusted face, giving a small shiver as Belle looked at him in utter disgust, feeling dirty listening to him. Then, a thought occurred to her. You said that was the second most important. I'm going to regret this, but what's the first? She asked, Naruto looking at her with saddened eyes. If a female touches you without permission, you will physically punish her, and then if she's lucky, she won't be left nude in a public forum to be used however. The lucky ones get executed, usually by decapitation, or every few in 1,000 will be forgiven and traded to the one touched. Naruto said, and Belle gasped, tears starting to roll down her cheeks as Naruto appeared at her side, clutching her as she cried. Do you see now, it takes a truly despicable, twisted kind of soul to follow the laws where we're going, and something tells me you don't have it in you to do those kind of things. However, if you wear the collar, all you have to do is say nothing, and trust me to not misuse that trust. Can you do that, dear bookworm? He said, and she laughed a garbled laugh at his nickname for her. Well, looky here boys, I told ya we'd find something if we just had some pash pashus aw, ya know what I mean. A voice called out, Naruto's eyes snapping to the side as he saw 3 men come out of the shadows of the forest. Yeah, Stroot, and he looks like he might give ya some fun. A second one said, turning slightly. Naruto could see the one speaking looked like his head had been used to clean out a stewpot. It's Stuart, you half-pint. And I was talking 'bout that in with the tits. She looks like a screamer, and I bet dis little ball can't even last 10 seconds in, The first one said, and when Naruto spotted him, his heart gave a small leap. It was Stuart Regal, a wanted traitor. He betrayed his platoon to a gang of rogues for some gold, and then afterwards took over the gang, leading them on raiding parties across the land, leaving a trail of murder, rape, and burnt houses in his wake. Seconds, is that the really short one? A third voice said, and Naruto couldn't see him without turning fully around. and he wanted to keep the element of surprise on his side. "No, that's you, Shorty. Now stop arguing and tie him up," Stuart said, the greasy one groaning as he approached Naruto. He quickly looked back at Belle to see her looking fearfully at him. He pressed a finger to her lips, shushing her as he suddenly leapt up, pulling a knife from a hidden sheath inside his cloak, sinking it into Shorty's neck, kicking him off as his face showed the surprise. Before either of the other two could react, Naruto flung his knife at the unknown one, the blade catching him in the shoulder as he stumbled back, clutching the bleeding wound as he pulled it out, tossing it to the side before charging Naruto, who pulled his sword free of its scabbard, relishing in one of his favorite sounds, the slither of steel on steel. The man, who looked barely old enough to be considered a man, came in from Naruto's right shoulder, heavily favoring his uninjured side. With nary a sound, Naruto crossed their blades, using his surprising upper body strength to shove the boy man back, swinging his sword low as it bit into the twice-injured man's upper thigh, sending him to the ground as Naruto flicked his word, scattering crimson liquid of the ground. Turning to the last one, his real target, he found him with a knife to Belle's throat. He had a vicious grin on his face as he looked contemptuously at Naruto. Well, as I live and breathe, Cap'n Gold. I didn't think they'd send you in, a rookie after little ol' me. I mean really, Dissen looks like she belongs in a brothel more than dem barracks," Stuart said, Belle grimacing at his rotting breath. The majority of his teeth were black as Naruto's blade, what few he had left, which could explain his inability for basic grammar. "Barracks, that's probably the longest word I've ever heard you use, Regal," Naruto said, switching immediately into captain mode. His sword hung loosely in his hand to the side, baiting the traitorous guardsman. "Oi, watch it, ya fathead. I'd hate ta twitch and cut Dissen's sweet skin. You sure know how ta pick cap'n," the rogue said, using his free hand to reach up as he groped Belle, who whimpered, tears falling from her eyes. "Yeah, like that girl you had back in the city. What was her name? Melanie, I believe." Naruto smirked darkly as Stuart paused, glaring at Naruto as he growled, squeezing Belle tightly, drawing a thin line of blood from her neck. "You leave her alone, or I swear I'ma cut ya neck, and pass your girlie around da camp." Regal snarled, and Naruto smirked, sticking up his middle finger. "That's it, you die," he yelled, throwing Belle to the side as he charged at Naruto, throwing his knife with surprising accuracy as Naruto brought his sword to bear as it blocked the twirling knife, barely having time to cross blades with Regal's sword as he swung low. "Ya can't beat me, Cap'n. Don't ya, member. Ya taught me all ya tricks," he yelled as Naruto feinted right, but Regal saw through it, blocking his exposed left side. Rather than push his blade back, Regal kicked outwards, Naruto leaping back as he frowned, looking at Regal apathetically. "True, that is why I learned some new tricks," Naruto taunted, sheathing his sword as Regal growled at him, arrogantly charging in as Naruto dropped down, rolling by him as he pulled a second knife out, this one longer as he spun it around to a reverse grip, sinking it into the traitor's kneecap, crumpling him. Naruto came to his feet in one continuous smooth movement, placing the razor-sharp edge to Regal's throat, drawing blood. "As a former member of the Queen's Knights, you are entitled to a final statement," Naruto said, and Regal growled at him, spitting at him as Naruto flicked it aside with his dagger. "I'm not going to beg for my life, Gold," Regal said, and Naruto shrugged his shoulders, driving his dagger into the former knight's heart, twisting as he pulled it out, ending the man's life. "Now then, I believe, you were about to be my bookworm?" Naruto asked, and Belle sighed, clasping the collar around her neck. "Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you if I can help it, I promise," Naruto added, smiling kindly at Belle as the pair continued down their path. Trust and honor. Naruto sighed for possibly the 17th time since boarding the ship that was currently ferrying him and his slave across the seas to Xylica. To be honest, he wasn't totally okay with his decision to bring her along, which he'd voiced several times but not acted upon. While he wandered the deck, Belle was below deck sleeping, which he allowed purely because they had a long journey ahead of them and roughing it in the wild didn't seem like something she would be accustomed to. Not to mention that he could get by on as little as 4 hours of sleep a day while Belle seemed to require nearly twice that. Naruto snorted, females. As he looked out over the dank, misty water, he idly fingered the hilt of his blade, and his mind returned to that time. Yes, dear, I'll be along to bed shortly, Regina said to her fiancé. The king nodded, turning from the room as he pulled the door shut behind him. Well, he seems dreadfully boring for a king, a growling voice said, Regina whipping around to see her silent assassin, her magic already rising as the beginnings of a fireball could be seen in her hand. Naruto, what are you doing here? I thought our lessons for this week were already completed, Regina said, the fireball vanishing as she looked questioningly at the blonde assailant who was sitting nonchalantly in a chair in the corner. What? I can't visit my favorite student without an ulterior motive. I'm hurt. See right here where my heart is supposed to be. He pouted, the ascending queen smiling as she retook her seat, looking over several sheets of paper. Your favorite student? I was under the impression that we were learning together. Besides that, I'd hardly call myself your father's favorite either. That title belongs to you, Blondie. She spoke, Naruto rising from his chair as his orange refinery fell to the floor. Ah, you're just jealous that all the girls want me, and you can't have me. Although, maybe if you ask nicely and say pretty please, Naruto whispered, saying the last part in a perfect imitation of Regina's voice. And what is this utter rubbish about cutting taxes and giving away 1/10 of the castle's personal granary to the lower classes? I thought you were marrying a king, not a sugar plum fairy. Naruto snarked as Regina resisted the urge to smirk at his uttered thoughts. But with the drought going on, the lower classes need a break. Regina started only to be interrupted by Naruto's snort of disbelief. They need a break because they account for 70% of the kingdom's population, mainly due to the fact that they can't stop having kids. I mean, I appreciate the female form as much as most males, but you don't see me continuing my legacy, now do you? Naruto snarled out as he crumpled up the paper, throwing it against the wall. Speaking of legacy, you should drop by sometime and meet his daughter, Snow, Regina said, leaning back in her chair as she reached for the final paper in the stack. No need, I met her on my way up. I was under the impression that when you meet a strange, unknown man sneaking around in your castle, you don't walk up to him and go, hello mister, my name is Snow. Are you going to kill me? I mean, my father could, but if some idiot tried to kill my father, well, all the luck to him. Naruto hissed out as he grabbed up another paper, reading over it before his eyes widened in a rare display of anything but apathy. Have you read this paper? In the case of his death, he leaves everything not to his wife, or second wife as the case may be, but to his useless daughter. Are you okay with this? Naruto yelled, and Regina paused to look at the paper with a moderate degree of sadness, and a much more substantial portion of feminine rage. How dare he, and after all this trouble to find a queen because he can't rule alone. Well, we'll see how well he can rule from a pile of horse dung. Regina yelled back as Naruto looked at her silently for a second before a small smile broke across his face as he put the tip of the paper into the torch before dropping it onto the table as the fire spread. I think you can use this, precious, to take advantage of the situation. Naruto pointed out as Regina sent him a glare at the massive fire raging on the desk. Maybe, but I couldn't do it alone. Perhaps you and your father could assist me? Regina requested as Naruto rolled his eyes and shrugged his shoulders. My father wouldn't help you without a definite advantage you could give him. That's just good business sense. However, if the lady were to become the sole ruler of this decrepit kingdom, I would be glad to swear my fealty to your cause, especially since you would owe me. Naruto answered with a grin on his face that better suited a psychotic murderer. Oh, I'm a lady now, huh? Whatever happened to calling me rude names? Regina asked, genuinely curious as to his change of heart. When one looks like you do, you're either a lady or a wench that is far out of her depth. Although you'd look twice as resplendent and gorgeous with that crown on your head. I promise, Your Majesty, Naruto said as he bowed on one knee, his grin catching the fires as his whole face was dyed crimson, a look that was mirrored by Regina. All ashore, that's going ashore. A booming voice shouted over the sounds of seagulls and buoy bells. Naruto was shaken from his memories by the voice cutting into them. Not that it mattered, as moments later, Belle lightly pushed on his shoulder to get his attention. "Hey, we're here," she said, and Naruto snorted as she walked off, her shoes resounding against the wooden deck of the ship. He followed after her, subconsciously gripping his blade as he settled for leaping over the gangplank rather than wait as the ship's other occupants went ashore. As he started into the center of the small port town, he could hear Belle following, not that he couldn't find her simply by using his magic to call her to him. It occurred to him when a man passed by with a small group of women following, their necks all bearing a color and tag with a coat of arms to take Belle aside. "Don't forget, Bookworm, while we're here, I'm in charge. You don't talk back, you only speak when spoken to, and whatever you do, try not to show any emotion. Got it?" he hissed, leaving no room for Belle to barter as he pulled her out of the small alleyway as he headed for the logical first destination, the tavern. Pushing the door open, the strong stench of puke and yeasty liquor hit Naruto's trained nose as it crinkled in disgust, a judgment that was not disproved when he nearly tripped over a man passed out on the floor. Belle looked loath to even consider entering the building. Sliding into a booth near the door, he motioned Belle over, punctuating it with a snarl as she slid into the opposing seat with a cowed look. When no one was looking, he gave her a nod of assent. This garnered a small smile from the brunette, which in turn made Naruto frown. But before he could correct her expression, a young male with cropped mud-brown bangs swaggered over to the booth. "What you want to drink?" was the question, although the grunting voice reminded Naruto too much of swine. The fact that the man-boy's gut was hanging over the top of his pants had absolutely nothing to do with this assessment. "Nope. I'll have whatever goes down the easiest. She'll have the same in the largest mugs you got," Naruto ordered, Belle barely repressing the urge to kick him under the table until after the swine had left. "I don't drink," she hissed, which, regardless of the loud typical tavern conversations, still caused a temporary pause as those that weren't too drunk to care turned to look at the pair. "Did I just hear that little slut speak without permission?" a particularly elderly man said, and chorused by several other men. One ever rose to approach the pair, not bothering to pull up his pants that had pulled around his feet. It was at this moment that Belle first noticed the fact that of the numerous women in the room, she was one of only 3 not on the floor, and one of the others was allowed to sit in a chair purely to feed the male nearest her. Following the pantsed man, a redhead with smeared lipstick came out from under the table, also not bothering to wipe her mouth as Belle could still the evidence of her actions mere minutes earlier. She started to respond, whether with harsh words or steely glare, but Naruto took the brunt of the stares. "No, she ain't got any tongue for talking. I had my stable boy clip it out of her. It kept getting in the way. You know how it is," Naruto responded, his voice taking on the layered sounds of a man several cups drunk. "Ha ha, that sounds nice. Maybe I should try that with my whore here. I know she knows her way around my cock, but you can always improve, I say. Tell you what, how about I get my girlie to give you a sample and you let me go a couple rounds with your toy there?" the man said, and Naruto frowned, giving the universal answer of the middle finger. "You think that's a fair trade? This girl is untouched by man. I'm saving her for a special occasion. And I bet another round for everybody that thing you call girl is as loose as a sailor's tongue." Naruto snarled back as the man waved him off, falling back into his seat as Naruto shot a look at Belle not to say another word. She seemed to understand as silence reigned over the table until the serving girl came by, carrying 2 massive mugs filled to the brim with what would almost pass as sludge. Unfortunately, one of the men at the adjoining table took the opportunity to slap the girl's rear with a loud clap which sent both mugs tumbling down onto Naruto's head as he was doused head to toe in black oily sludge. If anything, it served to see how well Belle could keep silent as she went statuesque at the sight, although Naruto could make out the tightening of her jaw as she somehow suppressed the urge to laugh at him. Likewise, the other men occupying the bar had no such problems as a loud raucous sound was heard. As Naruto wiped what could only be described as mold from his eyes, shaking out his hair like a dog, a lanky man ran to his side falling to the floor. "Please sir, forgive my daughter, she didn't know what she was doing. I beg you not to punish her. I don't know if I could handle such things happening to my daughter after my wife was taken before me." "Ah, shut up you whiny prat. Do you think anyone will even consider not stripping her and passing her around the table?" a middle-aged man shouted over the loud prattle, his voice irritating Naruto as he reached down, and scooping up the 2 mugs which amazing were untouched from hitting the floor. Then before anyone could react, Naruto hurled the first mug at the man, the thick glass sending him tumbling backwards. Spinning the other mug around his crooked finger, he retuned his attention back to the man bowing on the floor. So, you want me to not punish the girl for covering me in this disgusting gruel, ruining my clothes, and most importantly, not begging for my forgiveness herself? Naruto asked the man, a hopeful look being returned as he sighed, running a hand through his soaked hair. Fine, give the girl her belongings. I'll take her with me. Naruto cursed under his breath as he rose from the chair attempting to clean off his clothes, only to sense someone coming at him with harmful intent. He turned to stop the attacker, which turned out to be the man who'd been hit in the face by the first mug, but he slipped on the puddle of beer on the floor as he went down, the man stabbing at him with a red-hot poker from the fire. Naruto hissed in pain before what could only be described as a wave of rage began to emanate from the blonde as he flipped to his feet, kneeing the man in the privates before gripping him around the neck as he choke-slammed him onto the table, his head bouncing several inches off the hard wood. With barely any trouble, Naruto also wrenched the poker from his hands, raising it up to strike the man. However, he gave pause as he glanced to the side to see Bell looking at him with fear. Let this be a lesson on what happens to those that irritate me. Now walk out of here, I'll join you shortly with your new sister. Naruto growled out, Bell lurching up from the seat as she ran outside, her teeth grit tightly together. Satisfied that she was gone, Naruto looked back to the man he was still holding down. The only thing I hate worse than a man who'd attack from behind is a traitor to his or her master. Be lucky that you are not one, or this would be your tongue. Naruto snarled out with a dark look on his face. Then, before his statement could be questioned, he sunk the still red-hot poker through the man's hand and thick wooden table. Rather than scream, all the man could do was make wet gagging noises as Naruto clenched his hand tightly, leaning down to whisper into the man's ear, one last thing, one shouldn't cross the black-hearted. With that, Naruto walked out, still twirling the mug around his finger. He gave a final pause at the door as he turned back, tossing the mug into the air before it transformed into a shower of glass shards. If one were to look closely enough, they would have noticed that his hand was idly fingering the hilt of his sword as the door shut behind him. Once outside, he found Belle vomiting into a bush, most likely because she had heard the sound of the mug exploding, which could have been mistaken for bones breaking to those unaccustomed to it. Beside her was the serving girl from earlier who now belonged to Naruto. He'd lied inside the bar once Belle had left. Not that he hated a traitor more than anything, but that he hated that sole thing beside backstabbers. Among the things he despised more than them were rapists, slavers, and most of all oath-breakers, although those he equalized with traitors. And so the idea that he now owned what could be considered a slave didn't sit well with him, although he argued mentally that now she could actually have a chance at freedom back in the enchanted forest. She had dirty blonde hair that fell to her mid-back which looked greasy. The familiar light he was accustomed to in humans was absent from her eyes, which he noted dully were a brilliant shade of brown that more closely resembled orange. She had a small upturned nose and cheekbones that gave her an imperious look, if it was for the stringy, greasy hair and lackluster eyes. Even more depressing was that he noticed her belongings equated to a small bag that looked barely big enough to hold the current ransom for Snow White in Regina's key queendom. His eyes fell to the next thing of note, her ample bosom, which seemed to spill over the top of her corset, despite the fact that it looked loosely tied. Her dress underneath fell to her mid-calf and she was barefoot. He was brought out of his observations by a particularly loud retch by Belle. Sighing, he approached the pair, the girl's eyes looking soullessly at him. Hello, I'm sorry to have to do this, but we're here on business and I'll need to send you back somewhere safe. Could you give me your name, perhaps? Naruto questioned, his tone soft as the girl looked at him before responded lowly. Emma, my name is Emma, master. The now named Emma said as Naruto nodded, pulling a small piece of paper from his pocket. He began to write on it with magic. Okay, your arrival is in order, Emma, but could you please not call me master anymore? Naruto said, and Emma nodded slowly. Of course, master, whatever you desire. Naruto sighed as he performed the perfunctory motion to summon the swirl of smoke that enveloped Emma, taking her wherever he had sent her. At the last second, he tossed the piece of paper into the swirl as it too vanished. Okay, now that that's done, would you rather spend the night here or in the wilderness, precious bookworm? Naruto asked, somewhat rhetorical considering he already knew her answer. Forest, I never want to see this place again. Speaking of which, when are you going to tell me where we're headed? Bell responded, following after the blonde as he headed for the town walls, and the mountains beyond. He answered with 2 words, Razorback Ridge, and although Bell didn't know where that was, in her limited experience, when Naruto smiled that big, it wasn't a place she wanted to visit. A castle broken. Naruto sighed as he looked down at Bell, who was curled up in her traveling cloak, barely a foot from the fire yet still shivering, her book fallen to the side as he marked the page, closing it as he placed it back into her bag with magic. He looked up into the sky at the large silvery disk as he shrugged off his own thick traveling cloak and placed it over the girl also with magic. She needed it more than him anyways, and besides, he had a second cloak that he preferred as he pulled it around him, feeling the rough bark dig into his back as he leaned back against the tree. As he began to feel sleep pulling on his eyelids, he breathed in through his nose, relishing in the scent on his second cloak as he fell into the realm of dreams. I said no one was to disturb me. Unless ogres are attacking the castle, I'll have you drawn and quartered. Regina snarled through her hands. She felt a hand softly touch her, and flared in rage as she called her magic to kill the person that dared to touch her so amicably. Well, I wouldn't say ogres per se, but your guards can't really stop me, now can they? Naruto said, as Regina's expression softened at the sight of him. He'd almost always had that effect on her to temper her emotions. Did they even try? Regina asked rhetorically. It was well known that Naruto visited on occasion to see her on some business from his father. So the guards had learned not to stand in his way or else they tended to lose their hearts. The first couple didn't, but you have a pair of rookies guarding your door and they tried. Even cut my cloak when I had my back turned. Naruto said disapprovingly. He despised backstabbers. Oh, yeah, some of my more senior Black Knights recently deserted me for that Snow White. Regina fell back into her annoyance at the memory. She would make that little girl pay if it was the last thing she did. So you have backstabbers and traitors among your Black Knights, and you expect them to protect you. Ha, it's no wonder you're so stressed out, Naruto whispered into her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. It's that insolent Snow White. If I could have her captured then. She let the statement trail off, but every time I send someone to capture her they end up either deserting me, or coming back empty-handed because the villages refused to give up her location. I can't even threaten them anymore because that is starting to lose its effect. Regina hissed as she rose, striding to the balcony, Naruto watching her curiously until he saw how her gown clung to her skin, and he felt his blood rise. He looked away reproachfully as he mentally scolded himself. Maybe, I could help you with both problems, he suggested, and Regina looked at him surprised, laughing under her breath. You help me, and what exactly will you get out of this? Regina asked, approaching him and standing closer than he preferred, but he refused to be the first one to back down. How about when I bring Snow White in, you leave her execution to me? Other than that, the idea of spending exorbitant amounts of time in the company of a beautiful woman, how could I resist? Naruto spoke, brushing her cheek as he leaned in before turning away, leaving Regina blushing as she touched her cheek. Wait, I can't let you run around the realm without some authority. Regina called after him as she used magic to call forth a raven's wing traveling cloak marked with her sigil. She tossed it to him, which he caught in the manner of it magically wrapping around him. He responded by turning around and mock bowing, by your leave, my empress. With that said, he turned and threw open the doors to her throne room. The chirping of the birds awoke the blonde as he looked to the side over the treetops to see the sun breaking the horizon. Dawn, when the artist paints the skies, and when the dead rise, he said as he rolled to the side, falling to the ground below as he landed silently so as not awaken Bell, who was still curled tightly in a ball. He chuckled softly as he began to prepare breakfast. Bell awoke a little over an hour later to the smell of cooking bacon. She groggily turned to see Naruto perched over the fire perfectly groomed. Bell sat up, yawning widely as Naruto looked up at her, chuckling lightly at her messy hair as well as the small line of drool coming out of the corner of her mouth. It seemed to take all her strength to push herself up as the two cloaks pulled at her feet. There's a small stream and pond about 100 feet that way. Naruto pointed off to the side, returning his attention to the cooking bacon. Don't take too long. We need to pack up and head on before the sun gets too high or else you'll be miserable. Naruto called after her as she stumbled off towards the water, her bag slung haphazardly over her shoulder. 4 hours later, Naruto paused to look around before nodding to himself as he continued on, Belle trailing behind him, still barely awake now that she was full and the morning sun had warmed her. It took a conscious effort to stay awake. Minutes later, she had had enough. How much farther until we're there? She whined to Naruto, who looked back with a smile as he stopped, Belle mentally praising him as she slumped to the ground like a doll. Depends. Do you want to take the scenic route or the dangerous route? Actually, I suppose that's an unfair comparison as they're both dangerous, Naruto said, and Belle rolled her eyes, as if anything the blonde did wasn't dangerous. I suppose it might be worth mentioning that the scenic route also offers breaks along the way, whereas the purely dangerous path is non-stop work, Naruto offered as Belle sighed, nodding her head as Naruto smiled brightly, looking behind him. Okay, then it should another 2 hours until we get there, maybe 3 depending on how long we rest on the way, Naruto said offhandedly, like he'd rehearsed this speech. I know I'll regret asking, but where is this Razorback Ridge and why are we going there? Belle asked, pushing herself back to her feet. However, before she could react, Naruto had scooped her up, the pair vanishing in a swirl of smoke as Naruto reappeared atop a tree, tightly holding the brunette, who shrieked, right into his ear. Hold on, I won't drop you. Now look over there and tell me what you see, Naruto whispered as he lowered her, holding on to her by her waist as he pointed off into the distance. Belle looked worriedly towards his finger, and her eyes widened in shock. How had she missed something like that? It's a massive wall of stone, she whispered, and Naruto's smile could be heard through his voice. Yes, that is Razorback Ridge, and our destination is some ruins on the very top of it. And the reason you can't see these ruins is because what you see only goes to the clouds, whereas the ruins are at least another 1,000 feet higher than that, and yes, the term Razorback does serve a purpose. The ridge is barely wide enough for a single person along the top, and this side is a straight drop to the ground below. So unless you suddenly learn how to fly, well, I'm sure you can finish that sentence, Naruto said, and the pair vanished once more in smoke to reappear on the ground, closer to the wall. Once more, Naruto set off before looking back at her with a considering look. I forget to mention, if you see any wolves, I would recommend diving off the edge of the world. And for once his smile was serious. As predicted, 2.5 hours later, Naruto and Belle stood in front of a massive castle that towered another 100 or so feet into the air, the various towers and equally various stages of ruin, with some untouched, with other being only indicated by a few large stone blocks. Welcome, precious bookworm, to, Naruto announced, his next words a bunch of gibberish that Belle couldn't make out, or it's called in our tongue, the saccharine throne. Naruto finished with a flourish and mock bow as he looked at Belle, who returned the look strangely. So, split up or stick together, what do you think? Naruto asked, heading for the door, which was slightly ajar with vines running up it, pieces of the wood littering the grounds where the wood had rotted. The fact that these pieces were similar in size to Naruto seemed to escape the blonde, but not the brunette, who was steadily growing more wary of these treasure hunt. I thought giants were a myth. You know, something to tell to kids so they'll behave? Belle mumbled as she raced after Naruto, who entered into the decrepit castle. Nope, but this isn't a giant's castle, notice the architecture, Naruto said, lecturing as he gestured to the various examples around the room, which was abnormally large for a traditionally sized castle. The columns are massive, yes, but notice the arches that crisscross on the way up. If you look closely, you can see the smaller arches built into the columns. And the stone blocks used are normal sized, which a giant would have trouble carrying and placing. So, another thing to notice is, Naruto trailed off as he looked around before finding his destination as he raced off towards a much smaller door. Belle followed after, finding him in a much more moderately sized room with a small depress in the floor that had a mosaic built into the floor which featured a lot of marble and gold depictions. What is this place? Belle asked as he looked around, before noticing that a small window was on the wall, and looking out of it, She barely choked off the yell at the sight. There was nothing in sight except clouds and the occasional bird that quickly dipped back down. Nothing except a small mangled body that was mummified. The baptismal chamber, which means, once more Naruto trailed off as she looked around before his eyes lighted on a wall as he ran to it, only to find that it went further in than it appeared as he turned and headed down the disguised passage. Baptismal chamber, what does that mean? Belle called out as she was forced to race off after Naruto once again. She finally caught up with him, in a large chamber, with various treasures scattered around the room among the mountains of golden coins. Goblins, but I thought those died out decades ago, Belle yelled as Naruto began to wade through the proverbial sea of gold. So the legends say, I don't know, but what I do know is that this castle was their capital. Two creatures could be so obsessed with gold, and only one of them would hoard so much. After all, the dwarves are honest that way and keep only what they dig up, whereas the goblins loot and raid like no others, and all that gold had to be stockpiled somewhere. Of course, the war between them is what caused this unnatural geological formation. Legends say that over 1,000 dwarves mined for 2 years until the mountain was left in this condition, eliminating the goblins' advantage of numbers. Naruto said, having reached the other side of the sea of gold as he looked at Belle with far too much glee to be considered normal. Anyways, the baptismal chamber was one of the most closely guarded rooms among goblins. You see, after the first son is born to the Goblin King, all following males are taken to the baptismal chamber and baptized in molten gold. Naruto said, looking around for something. Not finding it, he cursed under his breath as his smile turned to consternation. But, that's horrible and barbaric. That would kill anything, Belle shrieked, and Naruto winced as the cry echoed throughout the room. That was the point. By doing so, there could be no usurpers to steal the throne from the rightful king. However, legends also say that if the child did survive, then the goblins took that as a sign from their gods that the child was destined to be a great king. Maybe not the next king, or the one after, but they would be king, and a great one, such was their destiny. Naruto said back to excitedly, before he turned and spotted something as he took off down a passage to who knows where. Belle was caught off guard by the actions and paused before racing after him, only to have to likewise wade through the sea of golden objects, taking even longer than Naruto due to her weaker body. Meanwhile, Naruto had raced off in search of the throne room, and his goal. Running through the antechamber once more, he turned down a side passage that narrowed with multiple rooms offshooting from it. However, Naruto had read several books on architecture and knew that normally all hallways lead to the throne room. He was rewarded for this as he continued down the path, and came to a room with no doors that held his destination. A throne big enough for several humans to sit side by side comfortably, and on it hung a crown that, despite its simple appearance, that of a single golden band, Naruto knew held great power. It was said that all those who wore the crown would find great wealth. It also held a second purpose that Naruto intended to test as he lifted the crown. Feeling it heat up in his hands, it quickly grew too hot for Naruto to hold as he yelped, dropping it as it hit the floor and began to roll away, bouncing on the stones. He gave chase as his prey eluded him. He finally caught it back in the baptismal chamber, rolling in a ring around the depression. Scooping it up once more, Naruto started to place it in his trusty bag when he noticed one of the mosaics that looked different from the rest. It showed a goblin holding the crown aloft as he brandished a golden rod in his other hand, pointing it towards the sky. Bending down, Naruto ran his hand over the picture several times before finding it, a shallow divot in the tile where the crown was. Suddenly an idea occurred to him as he placed the crown into the divot, pressing down and turning it like a knob. With a low rumble, a hole barely big enough for the blonde opened in the base of the bowl, and with a smile, Naruto climbed down into it. At the same time, Belle was wandering around the castle, calling out for Naruto. It creeped her out how her voice echoed back every time. Seeing something out of the corner of her eye, the brunette turned sharply to catch a door shutting silently on well-oiled hinges. Huffing exasperatedly, she ran to the door, her shoes resounding against the smooth floors as she got to it, pushing on the door, only for it not to budge. Grumbling, she pushed harder, and yet the door still didn't give. With an air of finality, the brunette gave the door a swift kick which sent her hopping around 1 foot. Despite the appearance of a lightweight wood, The door was made of something much heavier. With a loud utterance of several words unbefitting a lady, even one of her current status, Belle stalked off only to stop at the loud rumble that began to come from within the castle itself, as if the great behemoth was awakening from its long slumber. Seconds later, she was struck painfully on the head by something. Looking around, she found what it was, only because more began to fall. An overhang had opened, and golden coins were striking the floor in a golden hailstorm. This had the unintended effect of the castle seeming to come alive as Belle watched in wonderment as the stones seemed to move around her. And then as wonderment turned to horror as she realized the stones were moving but creatures that perfectly blended with the stones. They had long gangly limbs and bony bodies as well as obtuse heads with large ears, several of which had insects crawling in. Their skin was the color and had the texture of either sandpaper or, Belle thought, paper that had begun to grow old, yellowing and curling up at the edges. But the worst was their voices, which closely resembled metal on stone. Once the initial shock had worn off, she realized what they were saying: thief. They cried, as one, as a whole, as the horde came to life, advancing on the innocent brunette who did what her instincts demanded. She turned, and with the threat of her life chasing behind her, she ran like never before, faster than her body could have ever before. As she turned a corner, she did the only thing her mind could think to do in these situations: she screamed. Clambering out the hole, Naruto heard the scream as it echoed through the castle, and his blood went cold as he leapt from the pit, his prize secure in the pouch on his hip. Bending low, he ran back the way he'd came before, coming into the massive antechamber with the soaring arches. Coming out the door like a horse at full gallop, Naruto immediately spotted Belle rushing towards him from the opposite side of the room, her face twisted in terror. Naruto didn't know why until he saw something from the corner of his eye move and glanced up to see the arches coming alive as thousands of small, sallow creatures were lining, heading for the columns littered around the room, which were bridged on every level by the arches. Turn right, get to the door, he practically roared over the growing sound of dragging bodies, Belle's head snapping up as she nodded furiously. Or maybe she was just breathing really heavily. Naruto couldn't really tell. Belle heard him, but thought he meant his right, and so she turned left, heading down a much narrower passage that wouldn't have looked out of place in a castle. Pausing once she'd turned the corner to wait on Naruto, she jumped and gave a small squeak when something grabbed her shoulder. She sighed in relief when she saw it was just Naruto. "I said turn right, and you go this way," Naruto hissed, the ruins having grown quiet, no doubt because the goblins were hunting them down. "I thought you meant your right, my left," Belle whispered back, and Naruto sighed in exasperation. "Here, put your collar back on. Its magic will keep you quiet, so maybe we can sneak out of here safely," Naruto mumbled, pulling the collar which he'd removed shortly after leaving the town out of nowhere with his magic. "Okay," Belle answered, taking the black collar with wavering hands when it happened. Belle never claimed to have the strongest nerve or the fastest reflexes, and it was showing now. As she took the collar, it slipped from her hand, and fell to hit the stone floor with a clear, reverberating cling. "Never mind, you run this way, and I'll try and hold them off," Naruto said, shoving Belle further down the corridor. "No way, you'll die. There's way too many of them, Naruto," Belle said. But Naruto glanced at her with the first genuine smile since this adventure started. "I can't die yet. I have someone I love most dearly, and I won't leave her alone. Now go," he yelled, and Belle stumbled back a few steps before turning and running away like a bat out of hell. Pulling his sword free, Naruto relaxed, feeling how his sword connected to his arm like an extension, just as it was meant to as he swung it, catching the first goblin to round the corner in what he assumed was its shoulder. Naruto nearly grimaced as it wailed, leaking black ooze from the wound. But he didn't have time to think about it as 20 more followed shortly, some standing on top of their fallen kindred. With a nonplussed breath, Naruto leapt into battle with the horde. If Belle had stuck around, she would have seen Naruto fall into a dance-like battle as he flowed throughout the battle, slicing at each opportunity and blocking seamlessly without effort. When it was over, Naruto stood amid the bodies, many of which were divided, all leaking the same black ooze. Sighing with relief once more, Naruto replaced his blade, a mistake as seconds later the first goblin stood to his gangly feet and ran down the corridor after Belle, Naruto cursing loudly as he chased after it. Belle meanwhile was running down the singular corridor which unlike the other one had no attached rooms, making her wonder where it was leading her. She got her answer moments later when she turned a corner, barreling down the passage only to stop, on the tips of her feet, leaning over a stark drop as the rest of the passage had broken off and fell down the cliff. Finally getting her balance back, she backed away, turning back the way she came, sending prayers to whoever was listening for Naruto to come round that bend. He'd have a plan. Her hopes were dashed as a singular goblin covered in black came around the corner, his ebony marbles locking on to her as he put his head down, barreling at her like a charging carriage. She could down nothing as she took a step back unconsciously, her foot going off the edge as she began to fall, the goblin leaping at her, grabbing onto her as they both went over the side. The world seemed to slow down as she looked up into the blue sky and sound fell away as rather than the absolute terror that had gripped her mere moments was gone as calm washed over her. And then it too fell away as she felt the magmata pain of her arm being wrenched from its socket as her eyes met the electric blue of her savior, who was breathing heavily. Behind him, she could see his midnight blade stuck into the stones, the only thing keeping both from hurtling to their deaths. Below her, she could still hear the unholy screams of the falling goblin. "I thought you died." Belle gulped down the throaty cry as Naruto struggled to lift the girl. Normally, it wouldn't be a problem, but the only thing keep him from going over the edge after her was his sword, which required the use of at least one hand, and he couldn't stand up to get some leverage without releasing the blade. "I promised you I would keep you safe, didn't I?" Naruto mumbled out, smiling softly at the brunette as she smiled back. Then, the moment was broken by the rumble coming towards them. Glancing back, Naruto recognized the sound, nearly identical to water flowing down a sluice. "Do you trust me?" Naruto asked quickly, watching Belle's face for her answer as she wasn't expecting the sudden question. "Do you trust me?" Naruto asked again, and this time Belle was ready as she nodded. "Yes, I trust you," she responded with some trepidation. "Then may I suggest if you suffer from acrophobia, vertigo, or you're a generally normal person, don't look down," Naruto said, and before Belle could question him, he released her hand and a scream was torn from her mouth as she felt gravity take hold as she fell, making a small puff as she hit the cloud cover. Meanwhile, Naruto took a deep breath, bounding to his feet as he looked back just long enough for the true horde of goblins to round the corner, filling the corridor much like water as they tumbled over each other, racing towards Naruto, who grabbed his blade, sliding it home in its place on his side as he ran towards an overarching arch, hitting the side, using his momentum to take another step up. Back flipping with just enough air that as he tucked his legs in, he went under the top of the arch and he slammed his feet into it, sending him rocket down after Belle. As he broke the cloud cover, he saw her tumbling in the air, and increased his speed, hearing the wind screech in his ears. Closing his eyes due to the tears blurring his vision, he caught up to her, rolling in the air as he wrapped his arms around her, pressing her head to his chest as he twisted the ring on his finger, raven's wing-colored wings sprouting from his back as he curled them around them both before opening them widen as their descent slowed and they shpt off like an arrow, zipping across the sky as the sun set before them. "I thought you were going to let me die," Belle sobbed out as Naruto comforted her. "I'd never forget that I promised to keep you safe, precious bookworm," Naruto whispered into her ear as he angled towards the northwest. "But, how?" Belle asked, and Naruto smirked roguishly at the brunette. "Rest for now, and I'll tell you when we land." And those were the last words Belle heard as she fell to sleep, whether by her own will or by some magic, she knew not, only that the sleep was long overdue. Mutiny. Naruto groaned as the ship pitched to the side, vomiting profusely into the provided bucket. And by provided, Naruto had swiped it from a deckhand. Meanwhile, Belle was on the deck, enjoying the beautiful day that was left since it was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Screw her, Naruto thought irritably. Once they'd landed outside the little hamlet, they'd had to wait another 2 hours until a ship was prepared for their return voyage. During that time, Naruto had explained things to Belle, who paid rapt attention, always eager to learn something new, although she did send masked glares at the blonde when she thought he wasn't looking, all things considered. They'd gotten lucky as Naruto had found out ahead of time that the slave movement had spawned a rebellion among some of the towns and hamlets, the dockhands, farmers, blacksmiths and the like, taking up whatever weapons they could to tear down the established rule. Naturally, this didn't sit well with the upper, wealthy class, which began to pay mercenaries to fight the revolting mobs. So, they were not disturbed during their joint lunch, Bell glad to remove the collar, although he'd paused when he removed it, looking at her wistfully before vanishing the offensive accessory with a small swirl of orange smoke. "So, you promised you'd explain to me about the wings," Bell said, tearing off a piece of bread to eat absent-mindedly. "When I started learning magic from my father, I always thought, I'm going to outdo you one day, normal son stuff. Well, it didn't occur to my thick skull that he was the Dark One, and outdoing him in any magic was a dream that would just sit on a shelf. It's why I don't use my magic in the same way as he does, or my fellow apprentice," Naruto said, taking a large bite out of a turkey leg. Chewing for several moments, he swallowed loudly. "I only use my magic to summon and vanish things with the rare case of punishment, but I'll not speak of that. If I have to fight, I'll use my fists if I'm trying to prevent bloodshed, but I much prefer to use my blade. It was a gift I received for my hard work I performed without the aid of magic. Anyway, it's an example of my preferred forms of magic," he said, gesturing to a passing wench as she brought him another tankard. "Blood magic? Oh my god, did you bring me out here to sacrifice me for some dark power to beat your father?" Bell looked at him fearfully as Naruto met her eyes evenly before turning to the side and loudly asking the cook, "Hey cook, what did you put in my friend's stew?" Bell blushed at her overactive imagination getting away from her, again. "Hee, it's fine. No, I frequent such places as this on my numerous adventures in search of the knickknacks you see around my father's castle and adorning me. And I've had a lot of those trips," Naruto mumbled under his breath. "Wait, so you collected all the magical objects in your father's castle?" Bell asked in disbelief. "What do you get out of it? I mean, if you wanted to become stronger than him, why do you give him more magical objects?" Bell continued, looking at Naruto in confusion. "We have a sort of agreement. I collect the objects, but I couldn't carry all those around with me, so I leave them in my father's castle where he displays them like spoils, which they are, just not his. Then, if I ever need one, I can stop by and pick it up. Think of it kind of like a library. You have all the books there, and you can take a couple out until you're done with them," Naruto explained, turning up his tankard. "However, I usually keep some objects on me all the time. I call them my essential five. First, my sword. I won't go into the details, but it's probably my most powerful item. Second, my bottomless pouch I have here," Naruto said, picking up the pouch as he rummaged around in it before pulling out a stack of gold coins which he stacked on the edge of the table. "It looks like a normal pouch, but I can put as much stuff as I want into it, and pull it later. Not only that, but it's individually divided. Say that you put a book into it, only you can get the book out. You can only get out what you put in," Naruto explained as the pair began heading for the docks, the sun climbing higher towards its peak. "So are the wings one of these essential five?" Bell asked curiously as Naruto smirked, presenting his hand, which had several rings on it. He selected one, removing it before presenting it to her. "Yeah, this is my Icarus ring, which if I twist it clockwise will cause wings to sprout from my back. With such a useful ability, you'd wonder why I haven't used it before, right?" he asked rhetorically. "Well, as my father would say, magic comes at a price. I can only use my ring for 1 hour a week, and I was going to use it to shorten our trip home, but we'll have to take the whole boat trip now. I only used about 40 minutes worth, but I don't want to use any more," he said, sitting down on a box as the ship hands began loading cargo onto the ship. "Why, if we can get home sooner, I'd prefer that," Bell said forlornly. "I would too, and if it was that simply, I'd just take off when we got close enough to the shore. But it comes with another problem. Using my Icarus ring gives me motion sickness. The more I use it, the more severe it becomes. I've used the full hour only once, and I've made every precaution to avoid a repeat offense," Naruto said, sliding the ring back onto its respective finger as he headed up the gangplank. "Wait, what about the other two items? What are they?" Bell shouted as she chased after him. I'm not going to say," Naruto said, smirking at Bell putting face. "I got to keep some mystery about me so you'll go on the next trip. I've been hearing whispers about an Ice Queen's scepter somewhere in the Endo Mountains," he said, mostly to himself as he headed for his room, while Bell paled behind him. Naruto's wistful remembrance was cut short by a sudden crash on the deck, causing the ship to pitch to the side as the blonde was thrown from his bed, made of piled grain, and into the wall, groaning loudly as he managed to will his magic to action to vanish the shower of his vomit that was headed for him. This didn't help the contents of his stomach that erupted from his mouth seconds later, coating the floor and his cheek. The pounding of his head was punctuated by the sound of someone running down the hall, calling for him as he pushed himself to his feet only for the ship to pitch the opposite direction, sending him hurtling across the room. He muttered a not-so-muffled curse, which changed into a thankful praise as part of the wall was torn down by an explosion. "Great, pirates, just what I need right now," Naruto growled, swearing as he pushed himself up, finding someone's arm under his as he looked to the side to find his fellow adventurer who had a thin line of blood running down her cheek from a cut. "We got trouble on the deck," she supplied as he tried to get his sea legs, Bell smiling faintly at his trouble. A well-placed growl made her stop as Naruto finally stood straight, with the help of his hand on the wall, supporting him as they made their way back out of the hold, down the hallway, and up a set of stairs to the deck. Shoving the door open with his shoulder, Naruto came face to face with a rugged pirate, who was promptly knocked on his back by the sudden appearance of Naruto, who rolled his eyes as they swept over the deck, noting the number of pirates which was manageable, although they did have the entire crew tied up. With a flick of his wrist, a small knife appeared from his sleeve which he immediately shoved into Bell's hands. "Cut the crew loose, and tell them to take cover in the hold unless they have a weapon to fight with. And if one of those tubby guys tried to stop you, just cut them," Naruto said, shrugging off her assistance as he stumbled forwards, his sword pointing towards the ground. He didn't need to look back to know that she nodded obediently, running towards the nearest crew member. The first pirate came at him with a classic overhead swing, which he leaned to the side to dodge, only to be thrown off balance by the tilt as he fell down, catching himself on his hand. Although he still managed to swing his sword out weakly, catching the pirate, whose sword was stuck in the wood, in his leg as he went down on one knee as Naruto rolled to the side, coming to his feet with wide eyes as his vision swam. The next two came at him together, both thin as twigs as Naruto gritted his teeth, as he leapt over the low swing of one, forced to barrel roll in midair to avoid the high swing of the other as he landed on his back, spinning around as he hamstringed the pair who went down in a pile. A quick cursory glance revealed that Bell had freed two crew members and was trying to cut the third one free when a pirate with dreadlocks tried to hit her in the back. Before he thought, he hurled his sword across the deck as it stuck the large plate in his shoulder as he yelled, cursing loudly as he tried to pull the sword out. A silent prayer was sent up to whomever was listening that the ship had settled for the moment, allowing Naruto to race across the deck, jumping off a barrel as he planted both feet on the mast as he pushed off, allowing him to grab a free rope as he swung straight at the injured pirate, tackling him over the edge, hooking his sword as they went over, flipping around to sink the black blade into the balustrade. As he used it to anchor himself as he pulled himself up, kicking a second pirate in the face, knocking him away from the preoccupied Bell, who refused to look up from her task, moving on to a fourth and fifth person who were tied together. "Don't touch her," Naruto snarled. With that, he leapt back into battle with the remaining pirates, his eyes alight with the rush of battle and protectiveness. Crossing blades with a pair of rotund pirates, Naruto was alerted to a third pirate by a loud cry of, "Watch out, Naruto," courtesy of Bell, who finished her seventh captive, racing to the ones on the other side of the deck. Biting back an indignant comment, he took a step back, pressing his back against the third pirate, and before he could react, stomped down, and swinging his left elbow back, smashing the pirate's open mouth, feeling warm blood cover the joint as Naruto smirked, bending over as he slid under the beer-gutted pirate, sending him tumbling over the sturdy, despite his lean appearance, blonde, and careening into his two fellow pirates. Naruto made short work of the downed trio. Then, a loud explosion was his only warning as his instincts took over and he bent backwards, a cannonball flying over him, brushing his hair aside as he went wide-eyed, seeing the cannonball crash into the ocean on the other side, sending a large spray up and rocking the boat as he gulped down the rising lunch, even as he crashed to the deck as his equilibrium went haywire once again. However, he was caught off guard as he was lifting by the neck of his cloak, cutting off his air as he blinked through the ears to see the most hideous pirate of the bunch with an eye patch, and judging from the smell, the eye was still there, only rotting away, several scars which oozed something greenish, and what appeared to be wholly blackened teeth. And then he spoke and Naruto barely repressed the urge to gag, before thinking better of it. "Not so tough now, are ya, lil, bast. Arg, gurgle." His words were cut off as Naruto chose this moment to, strategically, induce his motion sickness mixed with the repulsive smell of the pirate's breath. That is to say, he began to profusely vomit, straight in the pirate's face and open mouth. Needless to say, he dropped Naruto, who stopped vomiting moments later, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. Naruto grit his teeth hard enough to hear them creak as he hissed out from his position, "Go to hell." As he enforced his magic with his will as the rope anchoring the counterweight to the flag came loose, the counterweight swinging down moment later as the rancid pirate was thrown from the deck onto the pirate's ship, crashing into a stack of boxes which were broken. It was by sheer luck that Belle avoided being bowled over by the flying pirate as she raced for the captain who was tied on the dais at the aft of the ship. Groaning, Naruto stood unsteadily to his feet as he fought down the heady feeling as he leapt at the few remaining pirates. Coming up against another pair, Naruto this time tossed his sword into the air as the pirate's eyes followed it as he slid between them, grabbing their heads as he hit them together with resounding crack as he caught his sword, turning on the ball of his feet to catch the falling blade of a pirate that caused Naruto to smile. "Oh, hello Swillian," Naruto said sarcastically as he leapt back, kicking a downed pirate aside as he was put on the defensive, blocking a sideswipe from either side before parrying a thrust. With a gleeful chuckle, who returned fire with a quick trio of swings that rang out as Swillian blocked. "Do I know you? You seem rather annoying. And it's Captain Hook." Hook responded with a snarl as he locked blades with Naruto, swinging at the blonde with his hook, only for the blonde to deflect Hook's blade down his arm as it sunk into his forearm and Naruto caught Hook's hook with his blade with a sadistic smirk. "Not directly, rather I'd say you know of my father. He did give you that namesake, and it will bring me great pleasure to give a matching pair." Naruto snarled as he leapt at the pirate captain, pulling his sword free with the nerve-ending slither of steel on steel. Now Hook had a vicious snarl on his face as he smashed Naruto's sword aside, as he grabbed the sword with his hook, holding Naruto in place as he swung at his exposed back, only for the blonde to resourcefully use his left hand to lay his scabbard across his back, stopping the sword's progress instantly. "And it will bring me greater pleasure to rob Crocodile of his spawn," Hook said crossly as Naruto grinned, using his strength to pull Hook with him as he pulled his sword free, knocking the pirate captain down. Within seconds, the blonde had his blade to his neck. "Put down your sword, or your lady friend gets it," a third voice said as Naruto glanced to the side, not moving his blade from Hook's neck. A man with a red bandana was holding Belle from behind, the same knife held at her neck as she looked at Naruto with fear evident in her eyes. Slowly, he pulled the sword away as Hook knocked it aside with ease, kicking him down as the black blade clattered across the deck. "Don't you know never to bring a woman to a pirate fight?" Hook said haughtily, and turned to nod at the man holding Belle captive. "Good job, Smee. Now tie these two up and help me haul the treasure back," Hook ordered, and Smee got halfway through an aye when Belle suddenly stomped on his exposed foot with her shoe which sported a heel in classic female fashion, digging it in as he howled, dropping the knife with a dull clatter as he began to jump around, holding his foot, which Belle took advantage of as she did the only thing she had been taught to do in these situations. She kicked within the crotch as hard as she was able, sending the larger man sprawling, his face tight as he screamed and writhed on the floor. Rolling around, he still had the wherewithal to kick at Belle, who managed to dance around the weak attacks, although he unluckily, for Naruto, kicked out the block as the wheel suddenly went berserk, spinning around, sending every to the ground as the ship began to pitch unpredictably as Naruto went wide-eyed. The pitch did, however, save his life as it sent Hook's executing swing off target and biting into the wood as Naruto was thrown aside as he was hit in the face by the hilt of his own blade, which he grabbed at even as his vision began producing black spots. Pushing himself up, He immediately ejected the entirety of his stomach on the deck, which went in every direction due to the motion of the ship. With a resounding crash, the two ships collided. Forcing himself to stand up steadily, Naruto grabbed onto the banister as he snarled, "Screw this," and twisted the ring on his finger as his raven's wings sprouted from his back as he zipped at Hook, who unsteadily swung at the flying Naruto. However, Naruto was just as practiced at flying as Hook was at captaining his ship, and he spun in a corkscrew, gathering his wings around him as he avoided the swing, moving past him as he reached down, yelling, "Grab on, Bookworm. Let's lose these suckers." Even as unsteady as she was, Belle jumped up, the flying blonde grabbing her wrist as he pulled her up, her limbs splaying across his back as he stopped short to yell one final taunt at Hook. "I'll get you, Swillian, and your little ship too." With the raising of a single finger, Naruto turned and zipped away, his wings beating like a steady beat as he flipped, catching Belle across his chest as she blushed faintly as his wings reached the beat of a hummingbird's as they began going faster over the waves as Naruto gulped, knowing that he was pushing himself to reach the shores. "Why did you surrender back there?" Belle asked curiously. "I could have handled myself without you almost getting yourself killed." "Please don't say that again. I don't want to be the reason you get killed, Naruto," Belle mumbled afterwards. I promised I would keep you safe, but it's nice that you care," Naruto said with a rare smile which was as kind as it was soft. With that, he pushed himself harder, racing towards the far distant shore and the suffering it represented. Commitment. Naruto groaned as he gulped down the rising sick, practically falling out of the wagon that dropped him and Belle off. With mumbled thanks, and few gold pieces, Naruto headed through the trees towards his father's castle, mansion. Personally, he would have preferred to walk, but he landed far off course from his destination and was forced between a cart ride to the appropriated village, or a 7-hour hike. For the first time, Belle had put her foot down, stating simply that he was welcome to do as he pleased, but she was taking the cart. Honestly, he was glad, although he claimed he was too weak to argue. Belle followed along silently, although the blonde could sense her growing anxiety since she was about to face down her employer after she ran off without permission. "Don't worry about it, Bookworm. I'm sure he won't kill you, your entire family, and enslave anyone you've helped," Naruto said, whispering, "He might just kill your entire family though." He received no answer as he shrugged his shoulders, pushing a bush out of the way to spot the climbing spire in the distance. Naruto knocked twice before shoving the door open, announcing his presence with a loud, "I'm back, father. I got some interesting stuff this time, and I ran into an old family friend." Gesturing Belle in through the open door, he slammed it behind her. Turning back, he was met by the impassive countenance of his father. Well, it would seem the help has finally returned to her place. "I don't recall releasing you from your deal," he said evenly as Belle bowed down, prostrating herself. "Please, I'm sorry for leaving without permission, She trailed off and Rumple looked down at her with raised eyebrows. "You just what?" he asked, Belle mumbling, Naruto not offering her any help as he strode past her, heading for the table in the main hall, pausing momentarily to place the crown upon his father's head. The only signs of his father's thanks were the twitch of his lip upwards and the soft chuckle Naruto's trained ears picked up on. Seeing that no answer was forthcoming from the brunette servant, Rumple growled, waving his hand. "Fine, good help is nearly impossible to find. You will have only your shirked duties met by the time you lay down tonight, and there will be no further punishment than customary. Now be gone," he snarled as Belle nodded sharply, racing from the antechamber to get to work. Turning impetuously, he seated himself across from his son, who had conjured a plate of food as was his preference. "You mentioned a family friend?" he said impatiently, and Naruto snorted. "Your old friend lacking a limb?" Naruto said deplorably, rolling his eyes at his father's lack of reaction. The only sound for a few minutes were of Naruto's chewing before he lifted his cup to drain it. He resisted the urge to cringe to the foul liquid. You'd think with all magic at his disposal, Rumpelstiltskin could make a drop of tea, but alas, 'twas not to be. "And his head rests at the bottom of the sea," Naruto's father stated, not doubting his son's ability to finish off the single-handed pirate single-handedly. He gave small giggle at that. "No, I left him with all his organs and limbs in his possession," Naruto said, producing a small saucer with a slice of pie as he cut the tip off, lifting it to his mouth. It was stopped by the steady hand of his father. "You're losing your edge. A few years, hell, a few months ago you would have gutted him and hung his body from the crow's nest." Rumple sighed, and Naruto looked at him with an apathetic look. "No, I'm losing my patience. I've grown to love my particular brand of execution, and that requires time and supplies, only one of which were available at the time," Naruto retorted, placing the pie in his mouth as he sighed contentedly. "I didn't have much choice. As I said, I didn't have time, which took the choice out of my hands since I did promise you I'd bring Belle back safely. And I even got her to stand up to people. She'll be a fighter before long," Naruto laughingly trilled, a habit he picked up from his father. "I still don't quite know what you see in her, but I wouldn't mind if I were to call her mother." "Not that I ever knew my real mother," Naruto said bitingly as he stood, taking a second sip of the tea to wash down the pie only to gag this time. "And for God's sake, don't let her get away if for no other reason than she can steep a wonderful decanter of tea," Naruto snarked, stalking from the room as his cloak fluttered behind him, his sword setting the pace as it bounced against his thigh. "I'm going to bed, and I have business to attend to tomorrow, so don't bother me," the blonde snarled, flicking his wrist as he vanished in a plume of smoke. Despite his words of business to attend to, Naruto meandered around Chateau Rumpelstiltskin all day, wandering the halls as old memories surfaced. He recalled when he was younger running through these halls, and as he got older he was allowed into more and more rooms until he reached adulthood and he left on his first adventure to retrieve some magical artifact that ended up being only a rumor. Sitting in the library for a few hours, he found each and every one of his favorite books, slipping them into his bag. Each touch of his fingers on the worn covers and spines brought emotions buried deep to the surface. A short stint at the study's solitude brought him to upending his coin purse, counting each coin meticulously before replacing them. Beginning to rise, he saw his hands, and thought of the years of magical training he'd endured to get to his current level. In a rare display of true anger, he smashed his hand down on the desk, carving furrows in the lacquered wood as he turned and left the room in a long stride. Entering the main room, he saw his father at his wheel, weaving golden thread in a perfect curling pile. Turning silently, a large raven flew in through the open window, lighting on Naruto's shoulder as he looked it in the eye, his mind going to the black-hearted queen, as well as his fellow student, Regina. A quick series of clicks sent the bird back the way it came, and Naruto rushed from the room, his mind made up as he grabbed his traveling cloak, opening the door as he shut it behind him silently with magic. He didn't look back, nor did he notice that the signet ring he'd deliberately left in his room had reappeared in his pocket. Shaking his head, Naruto banished the thoughts. He didn't realize when he'd slipped into his memories, but he smirked at the similar path he was taking this time, as he rose from his high-backed chair, and headed for the door, pulling on his Queen's Guard cloak, strapping his blade to his side, making a quick side trip to the vault to grab some supplies, then checking that his bag was still attached to his belt as he opened the door, closing it silently behind himself. Last time I left to change my life by joining Regina because I was angry at my own strength. This time I'm joining her because his thoughts were cut off by the soft sound of Belle behind him. "Where are you going?" the brunette asked curiously as she dusted off her apron. Beside her was a basket full of apples. "Home," he said with a genuine smile, a flick of his finger bringing an apple to his hand as he slipped it into his bag. While his hand was there, he reached around until he found what he was searching for, the object he'd collected in the goblin's last bastion. Satisfied with everything, he started walking forwards, vanishing in a swirl of smoke. He reappeared still walking, his footsteps echoing across the polished floor as he entered the throne room of his queen. She stood from her throne, meeting him halfway with an angry expression. "Where have you been? You can't just run off at your leisure. I thought we were clear on that when I appointed you captain of my guard," Regina ordered, her hands curled on her hips. Naruto noticed she was wearing a black shimmering dress he'd never seen before. He would have remembered the way it clung to her hips. "Well, Empress, may I say that you look astonishingly gorgeous, but I think you're missing something," Naruto said sappily as he reached into his bag to pull out a silver crown which was adorned around the band with gold inlay and a symmetrical pattern of alternating rubies and sapphires. From there it ballooned upwards into a bulb of midnight-colored satin, topped with a flawless circular diamond that caught the light, making it shimmer and iridescent. "Oh my God, it's perfect, what is it?" Regina asked levelly, smiling good-natured at Naruto to show she wasn't really angry with him. "It is a crown that turns you into my loving slave," Naruto said haughtily, placing it gently on her head, after first removing her usual crown. "Really?" Regina asked with mock skepticism. "Yep, now kiss me," Naruto said, bending down as Regina smiled, pressing her lips to his as the couple embraced, having missed each other. "Oh, I do love you. You weren't lying," Regina said in a sappy, love-struck voice. "Careful, Empress. You keep saying such sweet things and I'll think you're snowy under a spell," Naruto whispered into her ear, sending a flush down her face and neck. "Then I'll just have to do a few things that Snow White would never do for her sickening beau," Regina mumbled back, her voice sultry in the blonde's ear, his face flushed to match the queen's. "If I didn't want you so badly, those words would be ruining the mood. Sadly, we have business to attend to," Naruto said, walking away as Regina groaned, following behind him with a pout. "What exactly is this crown that you took so long acquiring? I've never known you to be one to collect idle treasures," the raven-haired queen questioned as Naruto turned with a shy smirk, a look his lover was unaccustomed to seeing. "That, my precious Empress, is the coronation crown of the Goblin Empire," he explained, and seeing her clueless look, continued, "The reigning king would give the silver band as a betrothal gift. If she accepted it, the cap would be added and she would be allowed to wear the entire thing on her coronation day so the entire kingdom could see that she was the one whom their king had chosen." He opened his mouth to keep going, only for Regina to place a single finger over his mouth to silence him. "Do you mean," she trailed off, Naruto knowing the end of the question. "Yes, I would like to ask your hand in marriage, if you would have me. I'm not exactly royalty, or even a noble, but I love you very dearly, Regina," Naruto rambled, not able to meet her eyes as she lifted her former crown from his hands, the blonde looking up to watch her as she lifted it, placing the simple crown upon his head. "If we're going to do this proper, then you need to wear a crown too, Naruto," Regina said demurely, straightening his cloak, not looking him in the face before she suddenly tackled him to the ground, capturing his lips as she released her feelings for the blonde. Kissing him deeply, she slipped her tongue into his mouth. Releasing her mouth, Naruto trailed kisses down her neck as he sucked on her pleasure point, and his fellow apprentice moaned deeply. "Hello dear, quit rolling on the ground with the common rabble," a drawling voice said, and Regina stiffened before climbing to her feet with some help by Naruto, who turned with a bored glare at the visitor. "Hello Korra," he growled. No love was lost between the two as Regina walked back to her throne, sitting down as Korra brushed past Naruto, who grit his teeth tightly as he contemplated using magic to turn her into a mangy cat. "What do you need, mother?" Regina asked in the same tone as Naruto had moments earlier. It used to be that she couldn't speak to her mother without losing her temper, but years of Naruto's steady presence had tempered her control. Korra looked pointedly towards Naruto, who crossed his arms, pretending that she wasn't there. "Boy, there are private family matters to be discussed, so be gone," Korra ordered, waving Naruto away as he uncrossed his arms, looking past the rude woman at his fiancée. "I'll leave you be when either my empress or my wife to be wishes me to. Seeing as you are neither, I shall listen to you no more than a serving wench," Naruto said in an icy tone as Regina sighed, gesturing for Naruto to leave. "In an effort to avoid a fight in my throne room, could you give us some privacy?" Regina asked imploringly as Korra smirked at Naruto victoriously. "The sooner we are done discussing whatever my mother requires of me, the sooner she will leave, and we can resume our previous activities," Regina said as Naruto nodded, turning on his heel as he left with a soft swish of his cloak. However, he turned back at the threshold to question Regina. "Did a blonde woman called Emma appear sometime in the past few days?" he asked as Regina paused, looking confused by the question before nodding hesitantly. "Yes, I placed her in the dungeon since she refused to obey me," Regina answered as Naruto nodded sharply, leaving as the doors slammed behind him with a twitch of his fingers. 3 years later, Snow happily kissed her husband, Charming, as he had come to be known by way of his now wife Snow White. They had been married 10 months now, and had lived in the castle once occupied by the evil Queen Regina, Snow's stepmother, nearly twice as long. Currently, they were sitting in their shared throne room, embracing each other. They had just returned from a meeting with Rumpelstiltskin, who was locked in the dungeon, as he informed them of their impending destruction courtesy of Regina, as if they weren't already aware of her declared revenge, but he refused to say what her big plan was beyond giggling impishly. "Hello, Snowblight. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by for old time's sake," a pleased voice said as the pair jumped apart, Charming grabbing his sword as he pointed it at the sudden third occupant of the room, Naruto, who wasn't fazed by the hostility as he met their eyes evenly without a shred of fear. "Oh, you can put down the sword, Prince Farming. We both know how this will end if we bring our blades into it. Besides, I'm here peacefully. You see, I haven't drawn my sword yet," Naruto said as Snow stood. Both now reigning queen and king approached him hesitantly. "Then exactly why are you here, Naruto?" Snow asked as Naruto tipped his head to the side as he looked at the brunette with half-lidded eyes. "I heard you had my father in your dungeon. I'd like to see him before the world ends," Naruto said, noticing the echoing of boots on the floor behind him as guards began showing up. "And why would you think that we'd let you anywhere near your father? How do we know you won't just help break him out?" Charming asked as Naruto smirked slightly. "It would seem Prince Prettyboy does have some brain cells. I promise I won't break out my father, and you should know how our family is about our word," Naruto assured him as he looked past him at Snow White. "Your father liked making deals, so how about we make one with you? We'll allow you to see your father, if you tell us how to stop Regina's plan," Snow said as Naruto smiled softly, running a hand through his hair as he looked at her with his electric blue eyes. "I agree, although you'll have to wait until after I see my father. I don't know what Regina's planning. That's why I'm here, to find out why she refuses to tell me what the plan is," Naruto said as Charming frowned at the plan. "Fine, but what insurance do we have that once you have what you want, you won't attack us and leave us for dead?" Snow responded as Naruto reached to his side, pulling his pitch-black blade free of its oiled sheath, silently. "When we get down to the dungeon, I'll relinquish my blade until I give you what you ask, and then I'll leave without touching a single hair on your precious little head so long as you give me the same courtesy. I promise," Naruto said as he gestured past him. After a short deliberation, Snow led the way, while Charming followed behind Naruto, watching him closely with a small contingent of 3 guards. It took little more than 15 minutes before they reached a wooden door set into the hewn rock wall. "Okay, he's just on the other side, so give your sword here," Charming ordered as Naruto shrugged his shoulders, flipping the blade into the air as it sunk into the stone block roof of the tunnel like a hot knife through butter. Before he could say anything, one of the guards growled, reaching for the blade's hilt only to fall back screaming as blood streamed from his heavily scarred hand as Naruto looked at him with soulless eyes. "I forgot to mention, my blade is made of shadow steel, so I wouldn't advise touching it until I get back," he said as he went through the door, Snow and Charming following behind him as Snow looked confused at Charming's face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and rage, although Naruto could also sense a third emotion, fear, in his glare which bore into the back of the blonde's head. "What's shadow steel, and why do you look so angry? I don't like that he heard of the men without breaking our deal, but..." Snow trailed off as Charming bent down, whispering into her ear. "There's no need to whisper, Prince Farming. I am both intimately familiar with what shadow steel is, as well as possess the ability to hear you without all the background noise drowning you out," Naruto said, not looking back as he turned a corner, entering another long corridor hewn from the rock. "Shadow steel is," Charming started as Naruto stopped, turning on his heel as he crossed his arms. "Shadow steel is considered to be one of the most expensive substances known, worthy more than 10 times its weight in dwarven gold. Its true value is due to the fact it is the most coveted metal in terms of weapon or armor," Naruto explained as Charming glared at him, the blonde ignoring the heated glare. "If it's so valuable, why have I never heard of it? For that matter, why wasn't it an option when we overthrew Regina? If it's as good as it sounds, the casualties could have been significantly less," Snow shouted at her husband, whose eyes grew solemn as Naruto once more was the voice of information. Shadow steel was especially valuable during its emergence and implementation during the Third Era, more commonly known as the Black Inquisition, when witches and warlocks were hunted like animals due to shadow steel creation process that rendered it immune, or at least mostly resistant to most if not all strains of magic. Naruto said before pushing off the wall. I think we've dallied enough. Snowblight, if you would kindly point the direction, we can be moving. Naruto suggested forcefully as Snow shook her head, her fingers gouging into her palms as her knuckles went as white as her namesake. Not until I learn why this shadow steel wasn't used during the coup. Snow shouted as Naruto sighed, Charming lost in his thoughts as Naruto looked at the queen with cold eyes. Shadow steel is simple to make, depending on who you ask. The process is little different to traditional forging methods for steel, with the key and only exception being in the use of blood instead of water to temper the purity of the metal. Naruto paused as he looked ahead once more, although he continued speaking. The purer the blood, the stronger the blade and better it keeps an edge and absorbs impacts. However, due to this distinction, you need a new pool of blood for each piece forged. An entire trough of innocent bloodshed for the sole purpose of making a sword. But what truly makes it special is how it's keyed to each individual bloodline. You see, once the piece was finished, I had to cover the entire thing in my blood, and then only I can use it, or someone with my blood like my child. Naruto said as he gestured past him down the tunnel as Snow was frozen aghast at his revelation. You do realize that unless I'm allowed an audience with my father, you will never learn how to stop my beloved's plan, nor am I obligated to spare your lives. If you think my blade is that sinister now, you don't want me to cut you with it. It makes you feel as if your blood has been replaced with dragon fire, a sensation I believe that would kill most simply by shock. Naruto hissed in a voice that could have frozen a hearth. Snow nodded, gulping down her rising bile as she scurried past Naruto, and Charming glaring vengeful at the blonde who followed as they resumed their trip. After a few twists and turns, the trio was in front of the makeshift cell that held the Dark One, Rumpelstiltskin, and Naruto's father. Hello, father, I'd heard that you'd been captured, but I didn't really believe the rumors so I had to come and find out myself. Tell me, how did you allow yourself to be captured? Naruto asked in a monotonous voice as Rumpel giggled, sticking his hands through the bars of the cage as he looked at his son who now stood taller than him. Oh, it doesn't really matter. I'm still in this cage and nothing is going to change that. So why don't you tell me why you're really here, son? Rumpel said as Naruto frowned, fingering the pouch at his side. I assumed that you would know what Regina is planning as her grand finale. After all, you did give her the idea and taught her everything you thought she would need to fulfill your plan. I know you've been grooming her for years for something concerning my brother, so tell me what it is. Naruto said, and even Charming and Snow could feel the resentment rolling off the blonde right then as Rumpel giggled. I really wish you two had gotten along better in your younger years. That's all I wanted, was for my sons to be happy, but instead you've hated him for something he did as a child. This will be your second chance, a way to reconcile after all these years and then you can get along like brothers should. Rumpel said happily as Naruto punched the iron bars angrily. No, that's your twisted fantasy, your second chance after he abandoned us. I want to hate him for what he did, but all I can do is hate the fact that no matter what I do, following in your footsteps, always being by your side, but even now, you'll always choose him over me. You want us all to be a perfect little family, but I have some bad news, father. Life doesn't work like that. I'm going to give you an ultimatum, and regardless of how you answer, your perfect little family that you want, will, be gone. Naruto roared as he stomped away the poisonous aura emanating from the blonde, nearly suffocating in the chamber as Snow and Charming held their breath. You remember when Belle ran away? I bet you never expected her to be part of our twisted family, but she's just as crucial a part as me or him. Well, guess what, father? She didn't run away. Regina and I were out on a stroll, basking in each other's presence. We just destroyed a village that refused to bow down to her in favor of Snow White. We found Belle walking down the road away from your castle. Regina had her captured, but I managed to persuade her not to execute Belle. Instead, she was left in my care in a private cell adjacent to my room right here in this castle. We bonded, although she wanted to be released. I couldn't do that, not when I thought she'd betrayed you. Naruto paused as he leaned against Rumpel's cell, the scaly male lacking a smile for once as Naruto smirked. One day, however, she told me why she was on that road that day. She was heading to the nearby village to buy you a present. She said she'd seen a locket in a shopkeeper's window, and thought you'd like it since you were always talking about your son, not me, him, but I pushed that to the back of my mind. I made a deal with her. She'd stay in my custody until you realized you shared her feelings. I'd seen the way you looked at her. Her room is still untouched, isn't it? So father, tell me what Regina has planned so you may actually get to be with someone who truly loves you. Naruto said simply as Rumple looked at him in disbelief as the blonde looked at him with a mixture of apathy and consideration. But, I promise, if you don't give me the information I want, then you will never see a hair on her head, father. But, you give the word, and she'll wait until the end of the world for you. We both know that you'll get out one day. Eventually someone will get desperate enough and they'll spring you. So tell me, father, are you going to have a son, or a son and wife? Naruto said as both Snow and Charming looked at the blonde with wide eyes. Rumple wasn't far away from the feeling as he looked into his son's eyes, recognizing the look in them. After all, the very same look had lived in his own eyes since he became the Dark One. He knew also that there was nothing he could say to Naruto to deter him from this path. She's using the dark curse. You just missed her, Rumple said, defeated as Naruto pulled away, gasping as he turned on his heel, heading back down the corridor as the now reigning regents followed, only to be brought up short by Rumple's voice. Do you forgive me, Naruto? Rumple asked as the former captain of the Queen's Royal Guard sighed. I never blamed you, father, that's the problem. No matter how angry I get, no matter what you do wrong to me, I love you. Maybe that's why I can understand that you still love Bae. I only hope you can forgive my actions, Naruto said as he walked away, mumbling the last part so as not to be heard by the others. Returning to the guards standing at the entrance to the dungeons, Charming grabbed Naruto's shoulder as the blonde looked at him with soulless eyes. Hey, Naruto, we kept up our part of the deal. You got to see your father. It may not have gone like you thought it would, but you still promised to tell us how to stop Regina's plan. Charming ordered as Naruto blinked confusedly before looking past Charming at Snow, who was looking at the floor. If you think he'll tell you, you'll have to kill me, Naruto said with smirk as Charming growled, punching Naruto, who leaned to the side, allowing Charming to punch the stone wall as he hissed, nursing his injured hand as Snow stepped up. You promised you would tell us how to stop this dark curse, Snow reminded him as he smirked, infuriating Charming. Yes, and now I'm telling you you'll have to kill me, Naruto responded. Over our dead bodies, Charming snarled as Naruto rolled his eyes. No, mine, Naruto said as he felt a sword point touch his back. Answer them, or you die, the guard ordered as Naruto smirked. That's the idea, the blonde said, offering up no more information than he already had as they were left in a standoff. You especially should know that I always keep my promises, Snow. I never killed you, did I? Naruto asked as Snow gasped, looking down as Charming looked at the pair confused. What are you talking about? What's he mean, Snow? The prince cum king requested. I was nobody until I fulfilled my promise to Regina. I promised to bring her Snow White, and in exchange I would be given the job of her personal executioner. My first public execution was your wife. I had a certain flair for killing those accused of breaking the law, Naruto said, glancing at the brunette who now refused to meet his eyes. I was renowned for my sense of justice enacted through my executive style. You see, I would allow those I was designated to execute to choose their trial. Well, most of them, Naruto said, holding the small group's attention raptly. I would visit them in the dungeons, and give them 3 items: a dull axe, a wooden sword, and an empty quiver. If they chose the axe, it was considered a confession of guilt, and I would give them a quick and painless death for their honesty. However, if they chose the sword, they were given a trial by combat, usually against a private in the Black Knights, though I was known to take their place if the situation called for it, such as when the accused was captured as a traitor. Your wife was one of those that I didn't give a choice. She got the quiver, Naruto said heartlessly as Snow gasped, holding back her tears as the memories came flying back. The quiver was a trial by their fellow peers. I would tell them the arrangement if they weren't already aware of it. I would escort the accused to the city proper and they would be bound in stocks for all to see. I would announce what they were accused of, and tell the accused that they could say anything they wanted to get someone to believe they were innocent. Of course, if someone truly believed they were innocent, they had to take their place in the stocks. At the end of the day, I would give the verdict. If someone didn't take their place, they were punished in varying fashions according to their accused crimes. If someone offered to take their place, the accused was set free with no punishment. But the person who took their place would suffer the punishment in their place. Naruto said, looking at the crying queen with barely a hint of empathy. Thrice your wife found herself in my court, and thrice was she given the quiver. The first time, 5 had to take her place, the second, 10, and the final 20, innocent, people were punished in her place. Likewise, thrice I was punished for allowing Snow to live, but I knew what I was doing. The war dragged on an extra year because of my actions on that platform. I explained to Regina, Snow would gladly die, but knowing that innocent people were being killed for her, Naruto chuckled as Snow sobbed, Charming glaring fierily at the blonde who shrugged off the look. That's my point. I promised each and every time that I wouldn't touch Snow if she was pardoned, and that each and every time I could make her beg for me to bloody her snow-white skin. I never did, and she always did. So, I'll say it one last time, if you want to stop Regina from casting the dark curse, you'll have to kill me. Although, maybe you just need a little incentive. So in the words of my mother-in-law to be, off with his head. Naruto said, and before anyone could react, he spun on the ball of his foot, his cloak billowing out as he perfectly caught his blade as it fell from the roof, bringing it bare across the guard's neck, spilling his wine-colored blood on the floor and walls. With minimal effort, he brought his blade up to block Charming's strike as he smirked, pushing him back as he turned to block Charming's follow-up by flipping the blade's sheath across his back, impeding the last guard's sword with his black blade as he swung down, barely breaking the skin on his leg as Naruto elbowed Charming in the face, as he flowed into his next attack, grabbing Charming's collar while hammering a snap kick into the guard's armored chest, sending him hurtling back as the high executioner head-butted Charming, crumpling him as he found the point of Naruto's sword barely touching his throat. The last time I saw your wife, I made a finally promise that I would take the life of one of her precious people. Just remember Snow. Naruto pulled away, glancing at the brunette knowingly, sheathing his blade as he strode away, his cloak fluttering as he vanished into a swirl of smoke, while Snow helped her husband up, nursing his bleeding nose. I always keep my promises. Naruto exited the swirl outside the castle, cursing the wards surrounding the monument to prevent unwanted intrusions by either of the happy couple's magical parents. However, Naruto was not deterred as easily as he sped towards the side, leaping up as he caught a low-hanging chain, swinging up effortlessly as he ascended the tower castle within minutes with his granted agility, landing in a crouch on the balcony connected to her personal room. On the wall hung her enchanted mirror, which made Naruto both growl and smirk in equal parts at the thought of the genie trapped inside the glass. A fire was crackling in the fireplace, giving the usually drafty and cold lofty room a warm, welcoming, and homey feeling. It was empty of most decorations, save the gifts Naruto had bequeathed unto her at his pleasure, each one punctuated with a happy memory that made Naruto smile. However, one thing stood out immediately as he ran towards the slumped body of Henry, Regina's father. Naruto wished he could have had the relationship he had with Regina's father with his own father, but he held to the archetype of mama's boy just as Regina did as a daddy's girl. Although Naruto admittedly did influence his own mother, stepmother, Belle, who treated him like a brother, as he did in return. "Oh Regina," Naruto mumbled as he felt Henry's faint pulse, recognizing the symptoms associated with losing one's heart. If he was younger, he might be able to recover better, but Henry was more sagely old man than knight in shining armor, and so the best he could do was gesture weakly towards the northeast, into the dead woods that Naruto likes to wander during the winter months, when snow clung to the branches, purifying the usually dark woods a pristine white. He'd never admitted to his fiancée, but at times he longed to write poetry comparing her beauty to the fresh snow, but he knew better by now than to mention Regina in comparison to anything associated to Snow White. Except the one time when he managed to salvage his manhood by mentioning he didn't care if he had to kill and pluck every swan in the kingdom so she could have her dream, virgin white wedding dress. From that day forward, she no longer was as shy about showing him affection in public, and she all but demanded that he hold her hand when they went out. Idly, the blonde wondered what the villains would think of the couple's innocent affections. They might even rescind his membership card if they knew some of the things he and Regina indulged in. Not that he cared. Sighing, he knew it fell to him to write things, and so with a heavy heart he turned, pressing a soft hand to Henry's chest as a silent promise went between the two. "I'll bring her back, I promise," and vanished in a swirl of golden smoke as he entered the woods, already spotting the rising column of black smoke in the distance as he began sprinting towards his beloved. "This is the beginning of my happily ever after," Regina announced to the small assembled group of creatures around her. The small circle included her raven, which acted as the emissary between her and Naruto when they were separated, a tree-like creature that leaned as close as its rooted trunk would allow, and an impish cretin that was licking its lips hungrily. "Regina, stop," Naruto ordered as the former queen paused, looking back as the sun-kissed blonde entered the clearing, his cloak fluttering behind him from his quick all-out sprint. The evil queen smiled at his appearance as he ran a hand through his wild, blonde locks. "I was hoping you would be here, Naruto, to see the culmination of all my hard work. I would have told you, but I wanted it to be a surprise," Regina said, putting her arms around his neck as she stood on her toes to kiss him heatedly. "I've already started the ritual. All I have to do is add the last piece and we can head off to some place where that insufferable Snow White and her boy toy can't stand in the way of our love," Regina said, twirling away as she giggled in a way that would have sent cold chills down almost anyone's spine, except Naruto, who knew that it was one of her quirks when planning pain for someone. "Yes, I spoke to my father. Really though, the dark curse, don't you think that's a little overkill just to have your happily ever after?" Naruto asked as he followed after her as she stopped in front of the large fire, slowly opening the chest on the ground to reveal a slowly beating ruby-colored heart. "Our happily ever after," she corrected as Naruto sighed, trailing a soft kiss down her porcelain neck. "I've already got my happily ever after with you, my beautiful empress. I don't need to go to some other world to be with you. Not when I have this moment right now," he whispered as she blushed softly, leaning into his side. "How did I ever deserve someone as adoring as you?" Regina asked softly, more to herself than him, although he still answered her with a soft kiss. "If I do this though, it won't be a moment anymore. It'll be forever," Regina said as Naruto smiled against her cheek. "Forever?" he questioned. "Forever. No more distractions," she said simply, lifting the heart from the box with care before throwing it into the fire. She didn't notice how Naruto frowned as the heart fizzled and popped as it hit the fire. She did notice when he gasped loudly, clutching his chest as he fell to his knees. "Naruto, what's wrong?" Regina shouted as she fell down, pulling his head into her lap as he looked at her with loving eyes as he struggled to breath. "I am so happy that you would love me this way, but I know, ultimately, between me and your father, you could never choose. The one you sacrificed would be the wrong one, so I switched out our hearts earlier today. I have always and shall forever love you, my precious empress. I wish I could have lived to see your happily ever after, but to be able to cause it is just as preferred. No matter what anyone tells you, you deserve a happily ever after just as much as anyone else. Give them hell in the new world, and never forget our love. Goodbye, my most precious one." With those words, he went limp and Naruto Gold, Uzumaki, captain of the Queen's Royal Guard, High Executioner, brother of Balefire, Regina's fellow apprentice, son of Rumpelstiltskin, and Regina's true love, died.